Chapter 118. Ji Fei left in the blink of an eye. The battle didn't break out. Chu Tian instantly relaxed his tense nerves, making him feel exhausted. Only then did he realize that his clothes had long been soaked in cold sweat. Ji Fei gave him a terrifying feeling. He was like a deity or a demon. Ji Fei was decisive in killing. In a split second, he had killed over a dozen guards with the force of a thunderbolt. Looking at the mess in front of him and the pungent smell of blood rushing into his nose, Chu Tian's face was still extremely pale. He couldn't calm down for a long time. He didn't doubt Ji Fei's determination to kill him at all. If Mr. Ning was not present, he might have died here with a grievance. If he was really killed by Ji Fei, then he, Chu Tian, would have died in vain. The guards that were killed by Ji Fei were in an incomparably miserable state. All of them had their bones and tendons broken, their flesh turned into mud, and their bodies were no longer in human shape. These well-trained guards were nothing more than ants before Ji Fei. Who is this person? Why did you offend such a powerful figure? Mr. Ning waved his sleeve and put the chessboard in front of him into his sleeve. He's called Ji Fei, and he's an ascetic cultivator. However, his identity shouldn't be simple. That Dongfang Long and Beitang Ao seemed to be extremely afraid of him, and they didn't hesitate to use despicable methods to kill him. Chu Tian didn't conceal anything and told Mr. Ning about the sequence of events. Dongfang clan of Eastern Qi and Beitang clan of Southern Yang. When did these two cultivation clans get together? Strange. Who could make them afraid? Mr. Ning slightly waved his feather fan. After listening to Chu Tian's story, he couldn't help but frown. At this moment, on the ancient road leading to Dragon Emperor City, there was a camp about 15 kilometers ahead of the camp of the Rising Sun Caravan. This camp was larger and had more people than the camp of the Rising Sun Caravan. However, at this time, the camp was brightly lit, and the sound of people clamoring could be heard. A group of black-clothed people were confronting hundreds of cyan-clothed guards in front of the camp. They were led by a tall and straight young man in black and a middle-aged man in black with a pale face and no facial hair. Although the young man was handsome and his eyes were like cold stars, there didn't seem to be anything special about him. However, the black-clothed middle-aged man gave people a very strange feeling. Especially his eyes, which were incomparably deep and emitted a dense chill. Cut the crap. Hurry up and hand over that thing, or else. The black-clothed young man looked maliciously at the white-clothed young man, who was standing in front of hundreds of guards. The corners of his mouth curled into an evil smile. This young man was the mysterious person who had tried to assassinate Ji Fei twice. Beitang Ao, if you know what's good for you, then quickly retreat. Offending our Ling clan won't do your Beitang clan any good. Beside the handsome white-clothed young master stood an old servant in a cyan gown. It was this old servant who spoke those words. Li Zhong, your surname is not Ling. If you're willing to hand over that thing, I might consider sparing your life. At this moment, the black-clothed middle-aged man suddenly stepped forward and impatiently said to the old servant. The black-clothed middle-aged man was filled with a dangerous qi. An extremely obscure strength was surging inside his body. He was like a ferocious beast lurking in the dense woods, ready to launch a fatal strike at any passing prey. Undoubtedly, the middle-aged man's prey were the members of Haotian Ling clan. That handsome young master was Ling Luoyang, who was disguised as a man, while that old servant in a cyan gown was Grandad Zhong. Dragon Emperor City was over 100 miles away from the ancient road. However, Ling Luoyang and the others could never imagine that their caravan could encounter members of Beitang clan outside Dragon Emperor City. Seeing Beitang Ao's unbridled gaze roaming around her body, Ling Luoyan's face turned ashen. She gripped the long sword at her waist, wishing she could rush forward and dig out Beitang Ao's eyeballs to feed to the wild dogs. This person was really too hateful. As the beloved daughter of the head of Ling clan, nobody had ever dared to look at Ling Luoyang in such a blatant manner. She was extremely disgusted by Beitang Ao's gaze. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have what you want. Grandad Zhong's aged words contained a kind of decisiveness. He looked straight at the black-clothed middle-aged man and emitted a majestic aura as he confronted the powerful enemy in front of him. Although he was old, his battle spirit was not. As a martial artist, Grandad Zhong displayed a kind of fearless spirit. Although the enemy was powerful, he would never hesitate in a battle. "You don't know? I think you're just pretending to be crazy." The black-clothed youth, Beitang Ao, stared at Grandad Zhong and said coldly, "Since you don't want to hand it over yourself, then I have to take it myself," the middle-aged man said with a cold expression as he stepped forward and wanted to attack Grandad Zhong. Clang! Hundreds of green-clothed guards immediately unsheathed their weapons and pointed them forward. The green-clothed guards of the Haotian merchant group were well trained. Their movements were neat and uniform, and a fierce aura immediately spread out. Obviously, these guards were real martial artists who had seen blood and killed people on the battlefield. The killing intent of hundreds of people gathered together. Even a young expert like Beitang Ao could not help but be moved. "So what if you have more people? In my eyes, you're just a group of ants." The middle-aged man looked at the hundreds of green-clothed guards in front of him and said indifferently. At the same time, a majestic and heavy energy fluctuation spread out from the middle-aged man's body. He was not being arrogant, nor was he speaking nonsense. This middle-aged man definitely had the strength to sweep away hundreds of green-clothed guards. Grandad Zhong's face was ashen. He knew that he was probably doomed tonight. This middle-aged man was definitely a rare expert in the Beitang clan, and he was not his opponent. The Beitang clan was one of the top cultivation clans in the Yang Kingdom. It had a long history, and no one knew what kind of foundation this clan had. They only knew that this clan was definitely not simple. To be able to not be buried in history and continue to be passed down, such a cultivation clan must have something extraordinary. "Uncle, why do you need to kill these people personally? It's better for me to get rid of these ants," Beitang Ao said disdainfully. He did not put the people of the Haotian merchant group in his eyes at all. "All right. Quickly bring the things over. I don't want to have any more problems." The middle-aged man nodded and retreated. This place was not far from the Dragon Emperor city. It would not be good if they attracted the attention of other experts. "Humph. Die." Beitang Ao strode forward and stretched out his right hand. Peng! A green light burst out from his palm. A large amount of green silk threads immediately shot out from his palm. Like countless tentacles, they entangled towards Grandad Zhong. Those were not real silk threads, but energy threads condensed from energy. This was a kind of magical ability that Beitang Ao had mastered. It was an extremely powerful magical ability. The green energy threads could cut through anything. "Xiao Kui, Xiao Yu, protect the young master and retreat," Grandad Zhong shouted in a deep voice. Then, he took a step forward and shook the long sword in his hand. "OM!" A dragon-like sword cry resounded as a dazzling sword light suddenly appeared. The dazzling sword light, like a silver dragon, soared up to meet the entangling green energy strands. Unparalleled sword chi constantly shot out and destroyed the thousands of green strands. Then, Grandad Zhong soared into the sky, turned around in the air, and waved the long sword in his hand. The tip of the sword turned into many cold stars and fell down from the sky, shrouding Beitang Ao under the endless starlight, blocking all of his escape routes. Grandad Zhong's sword move was very marvelous. Heh! Beitang Ao's face revealed a trace of evil smile. Reversal of heaven and earth. With a light shout, Beitang Ao waved his hands, and a wave of bizarre energy fluctuation suddenly surged out from his hands. In an instant, Grandpa Zhong felt like the world was spinning. It was as if the universe had turned upside down. In the next moment, a horrifying scene appeared in front of him. Chapter 119. Seeing his sword move being completely reversed by the opponent, even if Uncle Zhong was a seasoned fighter with a mind as firm as iron, he was still shocked. This youth of the Beitang family is actually a divine arts practitioner. Uncle Zhong was overwhelmed with shock and couldn't help but feel a trace of despair. A divine arts practitioner couldn't be resisted. It wasn't something a martial artist like him could contend against. However, he was incomparably experienced in fighting. When he felt something was wrong, he immediately spun his sword and used it as a shield, blocking in front of his body. The sword chi crisscrossed, and with a sizzling sound, it actually sealed the space in front of him. The starlight sword chi that shot back instantly collided with the sword shield. Ding ding ding. A burst of crisp sounds of collisions that were as dense as rain erupted. Specks of bright sparks, like gorgeous fireworks exploding, sprinkling down a starry radiance. At the critical moment, Uncle Zhong tried his best to block the endless starlight sword chi, but in the end, he was also knocked back by the unparalleled sword chi and lost his footing. However, it also resolved the danger of being injured by his own sword move. The two of them exchanged blows for a short moment, but it made the spectators' hearts palpitate. Especially the unfathomable divine art that Beitang Ao displayed, which could actually reverse the opponent's attack, was truly terrifying. Uncle Zhong was secretly shocked. Bean-sized beads of sweat flowed down from his forehead. This youth in front of him, with this divine art, was already in an invincible position. Protect the young master and retreat. Uncle Zhong made a prompt decision and shouted at the group of guards. Ling Luoyang was a woman disguised as a man, so Uncle Zhong didn't call her young miss, but young master. Yes. The dozen or so yellow-clothed guards immediately accepted the order and led the hundreds of green-clothed guards to spread out, protecting Ling Luoyang, Xiao Kui, and Xiao Yu within them before retreating. Even though there were many guards of the Ling family, they didn't panic and were orderly. Every one of them was an experienced martial artist. In the secular world, these guards all had the strength of a third-rated martial artist, so it wasn't a problem for them to lift 1,000 catties. Of course, the martial artists in the secular world had long lost the true inheritance of martial arts. Although there were thousands of people who practiced martial arts, they were all martial arts that strengthened the body. The martial artists who had truly succeeded in practicing martial arts had long gone extinct. If the hundreds of third-rate warriors of the Ling family were to be released, they would be comparable to an army of thousands of men and horses. Their strength was not to be underestimated. However, in the eyes of those in the cultivation world, third-rated martial artists in the secular world were just a bunch of ants. They could kill as many as they came. You want to leave? The middle-aged man who was watching from the side waved his hand, and the dozens of black-clothed men behind him immediately rushed out like phantoms. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. All of them forced their way towards the several hundred green-clothed guards. If it was at any other time, then it would simply be the stupidest thing to do, like smashing an egg against a rock, and it was no different than a mad act of suicide. But today, it was different. All of these black-clothed figures surged with a horrifying baleful aura, and they emanated a vast, ghastly, and terrifying aura. They were simply like over 10 madmen. The chi released by the dozens of black-clothed people faintly overwhelmed the chi released by the hundreds of green-clothed guards, which was really incredible. Beitang Yi, do you really want to kill all of us? Grandpa Zhong said in a muffled voice as he put his sword horizontally in front of him and gazed at the middle-aged man in black with his sharp eyes. I will say it again, hand that thing out. Otherwise, don't blame me for being merciless. Beitang Yi said sternly. I will say it again, I have no idea what you're talking about. Although Grandpa Zhong knew the situation was critical, he still didn't want to hand that thing out. Because he knew that the owner of this thing was in Dragon Emperor City. That person's background was greater than that of Beitang clan. If that person couldn't see this thing, Haotian Business Group would face a great disaster. Ao, do it. Beitang Yi ordered Beitang Ao as he squinted his deep eyes into a line. Yes, big uncle. Beitang Ao revealed a cruel smile as he strode forward. Numerous cyan strands appeared on his body, making him look like a huge cyan cocoon that was releasing tens of thousands of strands. Go! Beitang Ao roared as tens of thousands of strands of energy instantly soared into the sky and interweaved into a huge net, which covered the hundreds of people of Haotian Business Group in front of them. These hundreds of cyan guards were the backbone of Haotian Business Group. As long as they were killed, the rest were just common workers. It didn't matter whether they were killed or not. At the same time, the cyan strands shot towards Grandpa Zhong. After Grandpa Zhong tried his best to resist them for several times, his long sword was entangled by the cyan strands. Bang! The long sword was instantly minced by the cyan strands, turning into thousands of pieces that fell on the ground. Wah! With a miserable shriek, Blood burst out of the cyan light as an arm flew off. That arm was holding a sword hilt. A thin figure staggered backward. "You old man, go to hell." Countless cyan strands of energy rushed forward. When hundreds of people were about to be killed, Baetang Ao's reckless words were like a bolt from the blue in the ears of the others. With such a remarkable ability, even a powerful army might not be able to defeat this terrifying youth. Baetang Ao. Just when everyone was in despair, suddenly, an earth-shattering roar came from the back of the camp. The rolling sound waves were like galloping horses. Hundreds of people's ears immediately buzzed, and the world became silent for a moment. "Who is it?" Everyone was shocked, especially Baetang Yi, whose face suddenly became incomparably solemn. As for Baetang Ao, his face even paled. "Outrageous, that maleficent star actually didn't die. This is troublesome. Let's kill these people in front of us first." Baetang Ao's mind was shaken. The countless strands interweaved into a huge net and shrouded the hundreds of cyan guards. "It's him." Ling Luoyang, who was protected by hundreds of cyan guards, was completely dumbfounded when she heard this voice. Everything in the outside world seemed to have nothing to do with her. The person she cared about appeared in her moment of crisis. On the ancient path, a white shadow rushed from behind like the wind and lightning. The speed of the person was so fast that he left a series of afterimages in the void as he passed. In an instant, he came close to them. A mountain-like fluctuation of yuan qi surged over. Even the people of the Baetang clan turned pale. The dozens of black-clothed men were forced to retreat, and their figures were unstable. Damn it! When the person saw the scene in front of him, he was instantly furious. He directly pushed his palm forward, and endless golden light swept forward like a golden wave. Baetang Ao's cyan large net was about to descend on the heads of the hundreds of cyan guards, but the countless strands were all shattered and dissipated under the golden light. Baetang Ao felt as if he was struck by lightning. His body shook violently, and he continuously retreated a few steps. His face suddenly flushed red, and the blood in his chest and abdomen were rolling up and down rapidly. When his divine ability was broken, he suffered a not small impact. The palm power that was like a surging golden wave cancelled out the thousands of strands. "Who?" A gust of wind rose, and the white figure had already arrived in front of Baetang Ao in an instant. He directly punched out. There was no dazzling light, no terrifying yuan qi fluctuation, it was just an ordinary punch. However, this seemingly ordinary punch caused ripples to appear in the space in front of the fist. This was pure power that caused the space to shake. Chapter 120. His fist was like a landslide, its momentum was extremely fierce. Baetang Ao only felt pain from the strong wind blowing against his face. Before the fist arrived, the wind had already risen. Furthermore, all of the power was gathered on the fist, not even a little bit leaked out. Baetang Ao had an unfathomable divine ability, but he had a kind of feeling of powerlessness. It was a pure martial skill, not a Dao technique or divine ability. The most frightening thing was that there was no power leaking out. In other words, there was no power for Baetang Ao to shift, block, or reverse. Baetang Ao was so depressed that he almost vomited blood. He was truly aggrieved. He had no choice but to retreat. However, he was shocked to find that if he didn't retreat, Ji Yufei's fist suddenly accelerated and appeared in front of his chest in an instant. Under the pull of qi, Ji Yufei followed him like a shadow, not leaving any leeway for Baetang Ao to retreat. The strong wind set off by the fist had already pressed a fist mark on the clothes on Baetang Ao's chest. It was as if a 10,000 jin boulder was pressing on his chest, making him unable to breathe. My life is over. Although he rapidly retreated, he still couldn't get rid of the fist that was smashing towards his chest. Baetang Ao was immediately scared out of his wits. He was so nervous that his heart seemed to have stopped beating. In an instant, he felt the aura of death. Seeing that he couldn't avoid it and was about to be hit by Ji Yufei's fist, Baetang Ao suddenly felt the back of his neck tighten. After that, his body was pulled back by a powerful force. At the same time, a bright golden palm stretched out from his side and welcomed Ji Yufei's fist. Boom! With a loud sound, the fist and the palm collided in an instant. A gust of wind suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and a glaring light burst out. Like lightning, it instantly illuminated the dark night. The terrifying power caused the heaven and earth to tremble. The remaining power swept out, and the surrounding people were all knocked to the ground, looking extremely embarrassed. Gu Fei retreated 7 to 8 steps in succession, only then did he stop retreating. A series of footprints were left on the hard green brick floor under his feet. He was very surprised. Someone actually rescued this hateful Beitang Ao from under his fist. At this moment, Beitang Ao felt as if he was riding on a cloud. His collar was pulled by someone, and he quickly retreated. But the vast and mighty power released by the collision between Gu Fei and the person who saved him caused him to suffer a great impact. Not only is this Gu Fei not dead, but he seems to have become even more powerful. He is simply a monster. The corner of Beitang Ao's mouth was overflowing with blood, and his whole body felt as if it was falling apart. The impact of the energy that swept out made him feel as if he was being torn apart. Look after him. That man raised his hand and threw Beitang Ao behind him. A black-clothed man immediately stepped forward and caught Beitang Ao. The person who saved Beitang Ao was Beitang Ao's big uncle, Beitang Yi. Among the people of Beitang family present, only Beitang Yi, who had the highest cultivation, could rescue Beitang Ao from Gu Fei's fist at the critical moment. Who are you? Why did you use such a ruthless move on my nephew? Beitang Yi coldly stared at Gu Fei. From his narrowed eyes, a blade-like sharp gaze would burst out from time to time. This white-clothed youngster in front of him was not old, but his cultivation was incomparably profound. Furthermore, he was able to ignore Beitang Ao's unfathomable divine ability. He was not simple at all. He was not in a hurry to make his move. Beitang Yi did not dare to lower his guard. He was thinking, what kind of person and what kind of power could teach such a powerful young expert? Big uncle, he is the person I told you about. Beitang Ao, who was supported by a black-clothed man, said loudly to Beitang Yi with an ashen face. Hey! Didn't you say that he should be dead? Beitang Yi suddenly turned around and swept a glance at Beitang Ao. His gaze was as sharp as a blade, making Beitang Ao not dare to look straight at him. Beitang Ao's complexion instantly became deathly pale. He thought of the dreadful consequences of Gu Fei being alive. This would bring enormous trouble to their Beitang family. He had never thought that a person who had been poisoned by the so-called incurable strange poison could still be alive. The people from the Haotian trading group were confused. They did not know what the uncle and nephew were talking about. However, Gu Fei was very clear and understood. Come to think of it, the people from the Beitang family had obviously found out about his identity through some means. However, no matter what, he and the Beitang family were bound to become enemies. At this moment, the hundreds of green-clothed guards from the Haotian trading group had already protected Ling Luoyang and the others and retreated dozens of feet away. As for that Uncle Zhong, his right arm had been cut off from the shoulder. The two maids, Xiao Kui and Xiao Yu, were currently helping Uncle Zhong to bandage his severed arm. Beitang Ao's energy threads were as sharp as divine weapons. Being entangled by those green threads, Uncle Zhong's arm was naturally unable to be saved. Gu Fei. An excited, happy, melodious and familiar voice rang out from the crowd. When Gu Fei heard this voice, he could not help but frown. Of course, he knew who the owner of this voice was. However, he had a trace of complicated feelings towards the owner of this voice. He did not pay attention to Ling Luoyang. I really want to know why you want to kill me again and again. Gu Fei's face was expressionless and his voice was indifferent. However, everyone present could feel the killing intent in Gu Fei's words. Beitang Yi's expression changed. He then said, "This is all a misunderstanding. I hope that our two families can bury the hatchet. This is also a good thing for both of our families." Beitang Yi wanted to persuade Gu Fei and resolve the grudge between Gu Fei and Beitang Ao. You can treat it as if nothing happened just because of a misunderstanding? Do you think that's possible? Gu Fei could not help but feel that it was a little funny. He was also very disdainful of these people's faces. If the first ambush was a misunderstanding, Ji Yufei could still reluctantly accept it. However, the second poisoning was absolutely unforgivable. He knew that if the other party did not know his background, he would definitely not be so humble. He was afraid that he would have already taken action against him. Then, how are you willing to resolve this misunderstanding? Beitang Yi's voice started to turn cold. He never thought that this matter would be resolved so easily. Resolve? Unless that Beitang Ao dies, Ji Yufei said angrily. When he thought about how he almost died in Beitang Ao's hands twice, he could not help but be furious. Especially the second time, he actually used such a despicable and shameless method like poisoning. That means that there is no room for discussion. Very good. Beitang Yi's eyes flashed with killing intent. A terrifying fluctuation that was as heavy as a mountain spread out from his body. Since that's the case, I can only kill you. Beitang Ao took a step forward. His long hair fluttered without any wind. His right hand pressed towards Ji Yufei. Metal divine ability, Thousand Blade. Along with Beitang Ao's cold words that seemed to have floated up from the nine hells, a golden light burst out from his right hand that was pressing towards Ji Yufei. It was as if the metal elemental energy between the heavens and the earth had been drawn by an unfathomable force at this moment, gathering from all directions. Amidst the surging golden light, thousands of sabers and swords were condensed and slashed towards Ji Yufei in an overwhelming manner. Chapter 121. The metal element skill was overwhelming. The surging golden energy waves condensed into numerous sabers and swords. The saber chi rushed towards the sky while the brilliant golden light illuminated the dark night. Everyone was shocked by Beitang Yi's immortal skill. It was like an immortal skill, which made everyone's heart palpitate. Divine abilities were not immortal techniques, but if one was able to successfully cultivate them, they would not lose out to immortal techniques. Beitang Yi's metal divine ability seemed to have truly connected with the stars in the sky, drawing in the endless starlight and transforming it into a myriad of weapons. Among the five elements, the power of stars belonged to metal. It was one of the most overbearing forces in the world. Wherever the sabers and swords pointed at, everything would submit to it. It was extremely powerful. Humph. I've not imagined that this guy could trigger the power of metal element. That's really amazing. Facing the overwhelming sabers and swords, Ji Yufei still looked calm. The metal wind was like a blade, and the sharp metal chi collided with the ground. Puff puff puff. The hard paving stones were instantly covered with countless slashes from swords and sabers. However, they were unable to injure Ji Yufei. This ancient road leading to Dragon Emperor City was paved with extremely hard bluestones. Although it had existed for so many years, it could only leave some traces of carriages and horses on it. Among the five elements, fire can subdue metal. I'll use the fire elemental fist to break your divine ability. Ji Yufei stood proudly. His long hair was blown backward by the surging metal wind. Fire movement fist. Ji Yufei directly punched forward. His move was simple and direct. It was the embodiment of strength. Under the endless golden swords and sabers, his figure was incomparably tall. How dare you resist my 1,000 sabers and swords head-on? You're courting death. Beitang Yi revealed a disdainful look when he found that Ji Yufei didn't retreat. Instead, he launched a counterattack. However, in the next moment, he couldn't laugh anymore. An immortal flame-like chi surged out of Ji Yufei's fist like a great fire burning the sky. The dazzling red chi surged forward like fire dragons as if they were going to burn all the visible and invisible things in the world. They surged towards the golden sabers and swords in an overwhelming manner. Vast waves of heat surged out in all directions. Everyone felt as if they were in an oven. The oppressive heat made it hard for them to bear. The heat didn't seem to come from outside their bodies, but from within their bodies. Ji Yufei's punch actually caused everyone present to feel as if their entire bodies were being burned by raging flames. The hundreds of green-clothed guards and the dozen black-clothed men from the Beitang clan were all drenched in sweat as they retreated repeatedly. If he was an enemy, he would never show mercy. If he showed mercy, he would never spare his opponent any chance. This was Ji Yufei's consistent principle when facing an enemy. In a duel, it was a battle of life and death. The overwhelming golden sabers and swords instantly collided with Ji Yufei's fiery fist. A rumbling sound broke out. The sound wasn't loud, but it shook the world. Thousands of golden sabers and swords were shattered into streams of light that streaked across the sky. Finally, they were extinguished in the surging fire. There were flames everywhere and sharp edges everywhere. The strong light that erupted illuminated the world. Especially under the night sky, it was particularly eye-catching. Even hundreds of miles away, it could be clearly seen. Unparalleled strength was colliding, surging, and cancelling each other out. A great pressure swept out and shrouded the nearby world. The thousands of sabers and swords formed by the metal element divine power were actually block. It wasn't a divine power or a Dao technique, but it was better than a divine power and a Dao technique. The martial arts and combat skills that Ji Yufei displayed shocked everyone. When the light dissipated, Beitang Yi stood in the field without moving. At this time, he could no longer hide the shock in his heart. How was this possible? Ji Yufei flew out. He was surprised to find that the black-robed middle-aged man was actually a powerhouse that surpassed the realm of awakening self. He was at the peak of the 8th level of heaven, but it was still difficult for him to contend and he was forced to retreat by the metal element divine power. Although the martial arts and combat skills were not weaker than any Dao technique, the strength of the other party was there. In this battle of combat skills and divine powers, Ji Yufei was at a disadvantage. A vast amount of Yuan Qi rushed out of Ji Yufei's body, enveloping his whole body in a bright aura. He tried his best to stop his retreat. At this time, behind him was already a dense forest. You are actually unimaginable. Beitang Yi looked at Ji Yufei with a look of disbelief. He seemed to have thought of something, and his expression changed several times. This is. Uncle Zhong, who was being protected by a group of guards, was speechless for a long time when he saw the scene just now. At this time, he trembled and muttered to himself, I can't believe, the legend is actually true. Martial arts are not inferior to divine powers and Dao techniques. Uncle Zhong, what divine powers and Dao techniques? What are you talking about? Ling Luoyang asked. Her gaze was still on the imposing figure in front of her. You wouldn't know even if I told you. Uncle Zhong said excitedly. His face, which was pale due to losing a large amount of blood due to his broken arm, now had a hint of redness. I can't believe that I would be able to see true martial in my lifetime. Uncle Zhong seemed to have seen through Ji Yufei's martial arts and seemed to know that it was another cultivation system that was different from divine powers and Dao techniques. You have surprised me too much. I can't believe that I, Beitang Yi, am actually fighting with a true martial artist. You are a Dao sect's disciple, yet you cultivate martial arts. You are really unconventional. Beitang Yi took large strides towards Ji Yufei. At this time, anyone could see that Ji Yufei seemed to be at a disadvantage. Ling Luoyang and the rest couldn't help but break out in cold sweat for Ji Yufei. As for Beitang Ao, who had retreated to the side, he looked at this scene excitedly. With his big uncle making a move, Ji Yufei was definitely going to die this time. No one was clearer than Beitang Ao about how terrifying his big uncle was. His big uncle had just broken through to the transcending mortality realm not long ago, and was a divine arts practitioner that could contend with martial cultivators. The Beitang family's 5 elements divine powers were rumored to be able to shake the heavens and move the earth, and kill immortals and gods. It was a supreme divine power. Of course, Beitang Yi's cultivation was still far from the level of killing immortals and gods, but it was enough to show how extraordinary the 5 elements' divine powers were. Words are useless, let's see who's the real deal. Ji Yufei's expression was incomparably grave. The aura on his body was pulsating like a divine flame, and the muscles and bones in his body started to let out faint sounds of thunder. All the energy in his body was gradually being stimulated. Ji Yufei felt a dangerous aura from Beitang Yi's body, which made him feel slightly uneasy. Beitang Yi's cultivation had probably broken through to the transcending mortality realm. Chapter 122. The thick earth chi surged violently and couldn't be resisted. Dusky dust covered half of the sky. That wasn't real dust, It was the great power displayed by the earth element divine art. What a powerful earth element divine art! Ji Yufei was secretly astonished. This didn't mean that he was afraid of Beitang Yi. On the contrary, Beitang Yi's strength had stimulated Ji Yufei's arrogance. Martial arts practitioners were natural warriors. They pressed forward with indomitable will and were fearless. Even if they knew blood would be spilled 5 steps away, they would still fight, fight, fight. They would rather die standing than live kneeling. Ji Yufei's martial heart was extremely pure and untainted by any worldly concerns. His actions were all from the bottom of his heart. It was because Ji Yufei had no distracting thoughts in his heart that he could advance bravely and cultivate his martial path to such a stage. He didn't retreat or give way. Facing the thick earth chi that was swallowing him, he instead took a step forward proudly. He was still incomparably powerful as he punched out fearlessly. Fighting force with force, so what if he was a divine arts practitioner of transcending mortality realm? He would continue to fight without hesitation. He wanted to borrow Beitang Yi's hand to temper himself, to search for that sliver of opportunity to break through in his cultivation in the face of adversity. Ji Yufei wasn't stupid to fight with a strong practitioner of the older generation like Beitang Yi who was on transcending mortality realm. He was forcing himself into a dead end and then forcing himself to break through the barrier of cultivation. What Ji Yufei executed was wood element fist, using wood to subdue earth. Among the 5 elements, the wood element innately restrained the earth element. You have the divine arts of the 5 elements, I have the battle techniques of the 5 elements. Furthermore, Ji Yufei still had something to rely on. It would be very difficult for Beitang Yi to kill him. That indomitable punch seemed to have borrowed the endless power of the wood element in heaven and earth and communicated with the boundless primitive forest. The essence of the plants gathered and formed a green ocean in front of Ji Yufei. The resplendent green light illuminated the entire sky and earth. Wood element fist versus earth element divine art. The 2 terrifying forces instantly collided together. Rumble. This was an intense collision that shook one's soul. Everyone paled and retreated further away in fear. They were afraid that they would be caught in the crossfire. Even if it was just the aftershock of their clash, it wasn't something they could withstand. Ji Yufei, don't lose. Under the protection of a group of guards, Ling Luoyang retreated far away. She kept looking back at the scene, praying in her heart. However, Ling Luoyan's prayers didn't seem to have any effect. The heavy wood elemental fist force simply couldn't disperse the dust that filled the sky. Although the wood elemental energy innately restrained the earth elemental energy, if the earth elemental energy was too strong, it could also restrain the wood elemental energy. Dust filled the air. Ji Yufei retreated with blood flowing out of the corner of his mouth. He had no choice but to retreat. The formidable power of the divine ability made it difficult for him to neutralize it. As for Beitang Yi, he was following closely behind. Beitang Yi's hands drew mysterious trajectories. Green light flashed between his hands. That was a sign that the wood elemental divine ability was about to be unleashed. As expected, the wood elemental fist force that Ji Yufei had blasted out was actually guided and blocked by him in an instant. Then, it completely fused into his wood elemental divine ability and surged towards Ji Yufei. Beitang Yi cleverly made use of Ji Yufei's wood elemental fist force. In addition to his own divine ability, he formed a majestic and unstoppable wood elemental divine ability. Amidst the dazzling green light, endless dark green shadows of trees were condensing. They stacked on top of each other endlessly. This was a terrifying scene. It was as if an endless forest had appeared in the light and was charging towards Ji Yufei. The might of the wood elemental divine ability was truly terrifying. Peng! Ji Yufei's fists emitted 2 balls of golden light that were as dazzling as the sun as they collided with the endless dark green shadows of trees that were charging towards him. The violent collision caused his sleeves to instantly turn into rags that filled the sky. He vomited blood once again as he retreated, as if he couldn't withstand the attack. The 5 elemental combat skill was no match for the 5 elemental divine ability. This seemed to be a foregone conclusion. Ji Yufei directly crashed into the dense forest beside the ancient path. Soon after, The surging wood elemental divine ability instantly destroyed a large part of the forest. Broken wood and broken branches filled the sky. Haha. So what if you are a true martial artist? Under my divine ability, let's see how long you can last. A wanton laughter resounded on the ancient path. Beitang Yi chased after Ji Yu Fei like a gust of wind and lightning. Everyone present could feel Beitang Yi's strength. Beitang Ao was even more overjoyed. With his big uncle stepping forward, even if Ji Yu Fei was killed, it wouldn't be a big deal. Because this was no longer a matter that concerned him alone. With the backing of the entire clan, Beitang Ao's courage had also grown by a lot. And the instant Ling Luoyang saw Ji Yu Fei being blasted away, she couldn't help but cry out in alarm. Unknowingly, Ji Yu Fei's shadow had already been imprinted in the depths of her heart. You already have this kind of cultivation at such a young age. If I let you continue to grow, I will strangle you in the cradle even if I have to offend the power behind you. Beitang Yi's words were so cold that it was suffocating. The pressure that he emitted was as heavy as a mountain. He was like an insurmountable mountain that made it hard for people to look up at him. In an instant, he caught up to Ji Yu Fei who was retreating and executed the divine ability of the water elemental divine ability. Boom! Ji Yu Fei was sent flying by the huge water dragon that was formed by the endless power of the water elemental divine ability. He smashed through dozens of huge trees. A gush of hot blood surged up his throat, but he swallowed it back down. Traces of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He didn't feel dejected because of this, nor did his heart turn cold because of this. It was very normal for someone at the peak of the eighth heaven to be unable to contend against a divine ability practitioner of the transcending mortality realm. This was the embodiment of absolute strength without any tricks. His defeat wasn't unjust. After the divine ability of the water elemental divine ability, it was the divine ability of the fire elemental divine ability. Thousands of fireballs smashed towards Ji Yu Fei like meteorites with raging flames. The terrifyingly high temperature seemed to even evaporate the air, causing Ji Yu Fei to be unable to breathe. Boom! 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 One after another, the huge fireballs exploded in the primitive ancient forest, ruthlessly destroying the forest one after another. Ji Yu Fei used the 8 desolate steps to dodge the fireballs. Although he dodged the majority of the fireballs, he was still hit by dozens of fireballs, sinking his body into the sea of raging flames. However, Ji Yu Fei wasn't an ordinary person after all. His muscles, bones, and flesh were tempered like a magic treasure. The terrifying flames that could smelt iron couldn't injure him in the slightest. Even though he had rushed out from the sea of raging flames, the violent energy that burst forth when the fireballs exploded also caused a huge impact on Ji Yu Fei. The arms that he used to protect his body felt like they were about to break, causing him to break out in cold sweat from the pain. Even so, Ji Yu Fei still attacked Beitang Yi, who was chasing after him, with many dazzling blade lights, attacking Beitang Yi. The chi of divine weapon in his body was condensed on his hands. His hands were equivalent to an indestructible divine weapon. His hands struck out destructive lights that were like the edge of a knife. They had great power that tore through the void and destroyed everything. Even Beitang Yi didn't dare to take them head-on and could only retreat in anger. Divine arts practitioners were the same as martial cultivators. They didn't cultivate their corporeal bodies but divine arts. Therefore, Beitang Yi's corporeal body wasn't strong. If he was hit by the lights from the chi of divine weapon in Ji Yu Fei's body, he would still die. Using desolate steps and relying on the extreme speed of 8 steps and the technique of weapon refinement, Ji Yu Fei was firmly suppressed by Beitang Yi. However, Beitang Yi couldn't kill Ji Yu Fei in a short period of time. The two of them rushed into the primitive ancient forest and chased each other in the forest. In an instant, they were far away. On the ancient path, only the hundreds of guards and workers of Haotian caravan, as well as Beitang Ao and the rest of Beitang family were left. Kill, don't leave a single one alive. Beitang Ao came back to his senses and immediately gave a murderous order to the dozen black-clothed men. Yes, the dozen black-clothed men received the order in unison. They pulled out the weapons at their waists and pressed towards the hundreds of black-clothed guards of Haotian caravan. On the ancient path, The weapons swayed and flashed with cold lights. Instantly, a murderous aura filled the air. Chapter 123. Roar. Under the lead of Beitang Ao, the dozens of Beitang clan experts roared and charged towards the Haotian merchant group. These dozens of people's eyes were frighteningly sharp without a trace of emotion. Their footsteps were steady and they moved quickly. They were definitely killing machines. Protect the young master, kill. The 12 yellow-clothed guard commanders of the Haotian merchant group raised their arms and shouted at the same time. They charged towards the Beitang clan experts. Kill. Hundreds of green-clothed guards shouted in unison. Their imposing manner was like a rainbow. Their weapons covered each other. Cold light flickered on the ancient path, and a fierce murderous aura immediately filled every inch of space on the ancient path. The green-clothed guards of the Haotian merchant group all knew Ling Luoyan's identity. Although Ling Luoyang was a woman, she was disguised as a man. In front of outsiders, everyone called her young master, and no one called her young mistress. Apart from the group of guards who were unafraid of death and charged forward, the other dozens of guards protected Ling Luoyang as they retreated. The workers had already fled in all directions. Peng. Like a dozen whirlwinds, the dozen black-clothed experts of the Beitang clan directly crashed into the group of guards. Immediately, blood burst out, broken weapons flew, and then people also flew. Like a broken sack, they were thrown away by a violent force. They died in mid-air. A massacre suddenly broke out on the ancient path under the moonlight. Can't even withstand a single blow. Beitang Ao was like a sharp black sword. He was directly among the hundreds of imperial guards. His body emitted a bizarre energy fluctuation. All the weapons that were chopping towards him were inexplicably reversed and chopped the bodies of the imperial guards who were attacking him. Beitang Ao was too lazy to care about these guards. With his hands behind his back, he quickly passed through the hundreds of guards. Wherever he passed, the guards beside him all fell to the ground. He did not attack those guards. Those guards were all killed by their own swords. Such an unfathomable divine ability made the group of guards shudder with fear. But no one retreated because of this. No one retreated because of Beitang Ao's unfathomable divine ability. The group of green-clothed guards still fiercely rushed towards Beitang Ao. Hand over that thing, and I'll leave your corpses intact. Beitang Ao swept away his previous sorry state from being forced by Jiyu Fei, and chased after Ling Luoyang and the others in an extremely domineering manner. The guards who were rushing towards Beitang Ao couldn't even touch Beitang Ao's clothes with their weapons and died under their own weapons inexplicably. Along the way, the sound of bodies crashing onto the ground could be heard. Fresh blood stained the bluestone on the ancient path, then seeped into the ground through the cracks. The green-robed guards of the Haotian caravan were not on the same level as the experts trained by the Beitang clan. Their screams were earth-shattering. The green-robed guards' screams before they died were shrill and ear-piercing. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere. The ancient path turned into a living hell in an instant. Beitang Ao. When Uncle Zhong saw more than half of the guards he had trained were killed in an instant, he couldn't help but feel extremely angry. He spurted out a mouthful of blood. Hee. Beitang Ao grinned hideously as he approached Ling Luoyang, Uncle Zhong, and the others. His surroundings seemed to have turned into a black hole, causing others to be unable to sense any of his aura. It was as if he didn't exist. A yellow-robed guard commander pushed his feet off the ground and leaped into the air. The long sword in his hand turned into a dazzling ray of light and slashed towards Beitang Ao's head. Die! The yellow-robed guard commander roared angrily. His eyes were filled with fury and his face was filled with determination. He knew that this demon-like guy would reverse his move, but he still made his move. Beitang Ao sneered disdainfully and continued to walk forward as if he was taking a stroll in the park. Sure enough, before the resplendent swordlight could strike Beitang Ao, the yellow-clothed Imperial Guard commander felt his wrist fiercely shake. After that, the swift and fierce swordlight that he struck out, under his horrified and inconsolable gaze, turned around and struck towards his own head. It was the same move, the same sharpness, the same indomitable will. Puff! A mist of blood burst out in the air and 2 pieces of a corpse fell from the sky. The yellow-robed guard commander was actually split into two halves by his own sword move. Seeing this scene, the two maids, Ling Luoyang, Xiao Kui, and Xiao Yu, instantly turned pale with fright. The incomparably bloody scene made their chests feel stuffy and they had the urge to vomit. "I don't have time to play with you guys." Beitang Ao's face revealed an evil smile. Then, his right hand directly grabbed towards the heavily injured Uncle Zhong, completely ignoring the 20 to 30 guards that were protecting Ling Luoyang. The dozens of green-robed guards that were protecting Ling Luoyang, Uncle Zhong, and the others as they retreated were now left with only 20 to 30 people. Even their commander had died tragically. However, it must be said that the green-robed guards of the Haotian merchant group were extremely loyal to Ling Luoyang. Even when facing a terrifying enemy like Beitang Ao who they knew they couldn't defeat, they still showed no signs of collapsing. None of them dared to escape without permission. Thousands of green energy threads shot out from Beitang Ao's right hand like silk and entangled Uncle Zhong, who was protected in the middle by a group of guards. Kai kai kai. The extremely fine green energy threads rapidly traversed in the void, emitting a slight sound of breaking through the air. Everyone's expression changed and they felt despair. Even Uncle Zhong's arm was cut off by this strange green energy thread. This damned thing could even cut weapons. If a person was entangled by it, wouldn't he die without a complete corpse? Just when Ling Luoyang and the others thought that they couldn't escape death, a tiny purple shadow suddenly shot out from the dense forest beside the ancient path. That purple shadow's momentum was very fast. It actually rushed into the midst of the guards in an instant before Beitang Ao's green energy silk fell on everyone. Everyone only saw a purple shadow flash before their eyes. A large hole was torn in front of Uncle Zhong's chest, revealing the close-fitting clothes inside. Not good. A thought flashed in Uncle Zhong's mind. He spread open the 5 fingers of his left hand and immediately grabbed towards the purple shadow in front of his chest. Although he had lost an arm, his reaction was fast and extremely fast. However, that purple shadow had already used its claws to push against Uncle Zhong's chest and was sent flying. At this moment, everyone could clearly see that this little thing that was moving quickly was actually an extremely cute purple sable that was only the size of a fist. This little sable was different from an ordinary sable. It was much smaller than an ordinary sable, and it had a pair of ruber-like big eyes that were filled with incomparable intelligence. On its forehead, there was a deep purple vertical line that looked like a closed eye. Three-eyed divine sable. When Beitang Ao saw this little beast, he couldn't help but be moved. What shocked him the most was that this little beast was actually holding a small box in its claws. This was a brocade box that was 3 fingers wide and less than half a foot long. It was covered with talismans that were circulating with spiritual power and seemed to emit a misty radiance. Obviously, this was a box that was sealed by a talisman. The little beast holding this box looked extremely comical, as if it was a child carrying a big stick. It was very awkward. The movement speed of the little beast holding the box had obviously slowed down, but it was still extremely fast. It was like a purple shadow that was rapidly leaping through the crowd, wanting to pounce into the dense forest beside the ancient path. Quickly catch that sable. How could Beitang Ao still care about Ling Luoyang and the others? He waved his right hand, and the thousands of green threads immediately changed direction and enveloped the 3-eyed divine sable. Chapter 124. This little marten was the mystical little marten that Ji Yufei had encountered previously, the one that fed on the crystal cores of fierce beasts. That night, the mysterious woman used her great divine ability to seal the heaven and earth with a fire net. She did not hesitate to destroy a part of the forest and slaughter thousands of beasts in the forest, all for the sake of subduing this 3-eyed divine marten. However, what was unimaginable was that this little beast actually appeared here and snatched away the mysterious box that Uncle Zhong kept close to him. As a result, Beitang Ao's target immediately shifted to the little marten. To be exact, it shifted to the small box that was sealed by the talisman. Quickly catch that purple marten, don't let it escape into the forest. Beitang Ao roared and waved his hands continuously. A large net formed by interweaving green energy threads immediately appeared in the air in front of him and enveloped the little beast that was leaping and escaping below. Apart from the little beast that was holding the mysterious small box, there were also 7 or 8 Chingy guards from the Haotian merchant group that were enveloped by the energy net. None of them were spared as they were all sliced into thousands of pieces by the energy net that enveloped them. Blood sprayed everywhere as their entire bodies collapsed like building blocks, turning into a pile of minced meat. War. Seeing such an extremely bloody scene, Ling Luoyang and the 2 maids, Xiao Kui and Xiao Yu, immediately felt as if their chests were overturned and they vomited out everything that they had eaten during dinner. When Uncle Zhong and the group of guards saw this, their faces became incomparably pale. This black-clothed youth's method of killing was extremely bloody. Even though they were used to seeing death and blood, they still felt fear and trepidation. Although the little Martin was holding a box that was even taller than it, its movement speed was still extremely fast. In the instant that it was about to be enveloped by the energy net, it actually scuttled out from under the net. Chirp, chirp. The little Martin let out a cheerful chirp. Its calves supported itself on the bluestone surface of the ancient path and instantly turned into a purple shadow. It held the small box and rapidly pounced towards the dense forest beside the ancient path. As long as this little beast entered the dense forest, it would be difficult for Beitang Ao and the rest to capture it. At this moment, the dozen murderous black-clothed men had already surrounded it. Peng! His 5 fingers were like steel hooks. One of the black-robed men directly grabbed at the purple shadow. The power of the claw shook the void, making the sound of the air exploding. Such a powerful claw force. Uncle Zhong, who was protected by a group of guards, couldn't help but be shocked when he saw how powerful the black-robed man's casual grab was. At this moment, the Chingy guards that had been scattered by the dozen or so Beitang family experts had already gathered towards Ling Luoyan's side. After being attacked by the dozens of black-clothed men for a while, the hundreds of green-clothed guards were either dead or injured. There were less than 200 people left. It could be said that they had suffered heavy casualties. The subordinates trained by the Beitang family were even more terrifying than the Grim Reaper that harvested human lives. The bloody battle just now was simply a one-sided situation. Even the hundreds of green cloth guards found it difficult to contend against these dozens of death gods. The black-clothed man's pitilessly swift and fierce claw instantly enveloped the little Martin. However, the little Martin let out a squeak, and a ball of dazzling purple light suddenly erupted from its body, directly colliding with the black-clothed man's sharp claw. Wah! In the next moment, a painful roar sounded. The black-clothed man's sharp claw that was swiftly grabbing down actually exploded. His entire palm was blasted apart by the ball of purple light, turning into a mist of blood. Not only that, the purple ball of light that the little Martin had transformed into flashed in the air. Pu! It directly pierced through the black-clothed man's chest, piercing through his entire body. Pu Kai! Pu Kai! Fresh blood spurted out from the pierced chest, and the black-clothed man fell stiffly backwards. Even in death, he couldn't believe that the one who killed him was actually a little beast. Everyone who saw this scene couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. This was simply too unbelievable. Everyone was flabbergasted, and even thought that their eyes were playing tricks on them. Especially those green-clothed guards that had exchanged blows with the black-clothed man. That fellow was simply as terrifying as the Grim Reaper. An undefeatable and powerful enemy had died just like that. This made the group of green-clothed guards feel as if they were in a dream. Whoosh! Taking advantage of the moment when everyone was absent-minded, the little Martin instantly rushed into the dense woods beside the ancient road, leaving a purple trace in the air. However, the moment the little Martin rushed into the dense woods silently collapsed. Someone had secretly made a move, and a vast force had fixed the little Martin in the air. Beitang Ao, who was about to make a move, immediately stopped. He knew that the movement here had alarmed the powerhouses of Dragon Emperor City. Beitang Ao hurriedly looked around. As expected, there were mysterious figures flashing in the surrounding dense woods. However, Beitang Ao couldn't identify who was the one who had secretly made a move. Squeak squeak. Little Martin, who was confined in the air by an unfathomable force, let out a sharp and anxious cry. Waves of enormous force erupted from little Martin's body, and a glaring purple light dyed the surroundings purple. However, no matter how the little Martin struggled, it couldn't break the unpredictable force. The little Martin and the small box that it was holding were about to be taken away by someone's great ability. Right at this moment, a huge fire broke out on a hillside several miles away. A part of the woods was instantly burned into ashes by the terrifying flames. A figure wrapped in black chi rushed out of the flames in an embarrassed manner. Then, it directly turned into a ball of demonic chi and soared into the sky, trying to escape. At this moment, the force that confined the little Martin disappeared. The little Martin immediately uttered a squeak and rapidly darted towards the flames. "How dare you touch the belongings of our demon race? You deserve to die." A slender figure walked out of the flames. Her clothes were whiter than snow. Under the illumination of the flames, it was as if her entire body was dyed with a layer of fiery red brilliance. She was like a fairy of fire. As her sleeves fluttered, it seemed as if she would soar into the sky at any time and ride the wind. No one could see her face clearly. Her face was covered with a layer of veil. With a rumbling sound, she lightly raised her right hand and a fire net flew out from her hand. It flew towards the escaping demonic chi. The fire net instantly spread out and enveloped a part of the world. Just like that, it wrapped around the demonic chi in the sky, as if casting a net to catch fish. Roar! Within the fire net, the demonic chi surged. The person who was caught in the net roared again and violently tried to break the net. However, everything was futile. It was impossible to break the fire net. The fire net emitted a faintly discernible, transparent flame that burned in all directions. The surging demonic chi in the net was immediately burned into green smoke and dissipated. The mysterious woman who was surrounded by the monstrous flames waved her hand towards the fire net that trapped the demon cultivator. The fire net immediately flew back to her. After the mysterious woman revealed this move, the people who were secretly watching began to retreat. Some mysterious figures began to retreat, but there were still people who were watching from the side. "I am a demon general under the command of the Devil Domain's great demon sovereign. If you know what's good for you, then quickly release me." Seeing that he couldn't break the fire net, the demon cultivator couldn't help but roar in a stern voice. "Noisy." The mysterious woman only lightly said these two words. Then she pointed at the fire net that was flying back to her. The fire net suddenly emitted an endless colorless and transparent flame. The demon cultivator only had time to let out a terrified scream before he was refined into ashes along with the demonic chi in the net. The raging flames that enveloped the entire hillside immediately retreated like a tide and entered the mysterious woman's body. With a wave of her hand, she killed a demon general from the Devil Domain. The mysterious woman's lightning-fast methods deterred all the experts who were secretly watching the treasure box that needed a talisman to suppress. No one dared to attack the little beast again. Just as the mysterious woman withdrew the fire net, a purple shadow quickly rushed out of the dense forest in front of the mysterious woman. It was the three-eyed divine mink. Squeak, squeak. The little beast happily cried out a few times. With a few leaps, it threw itself into the mysterious woman's arms. "Little mink is so obedient. This is your reward." The mysterious woman smiled as she took down the small box that the little beast was holding. Then, she took out a crystal that was as clear as jade and agate and handed it to the three-eyed divine mink. The little beast held the crystal that looked like a pearl and began to chew on it. The incomparably hard crystal was easily bitten to pieces and then swallowed. This was the little beast's food. It was a crystal the size of a thumb. It was a beast crystal that contained spiritual yuan. Boom! Just as the mysterious woman was about to leave, a loud explosion that shook the heaven and earth suddenly burst out from a valley in front of them. Boundless vital chi suddenly burst out and immediately disturbed the vital chi of heaven and earth. After that, astonishing golden rainbows shot out from the valley. Those golden rainbows seemed to be connected to the boundless power of the stars in the sky. They emitted a wave of energy that made people's heart palpitate. "En." The mysterious woman immediately stopped her footsteps. She stared at the valley and muttered to herself, "I didn't expect there to be such a powerful martial arts practitioner in this world. His opponent seems to be a divine arts practitioner." Whoosh! The mysterious woman's figure disappeared in an instant. No one was able to see how she disappeared. The demon race has appeared again. After the mysterious woman disappeared, these words faintly came out from the darkness. Let's go. When Beitang Ao saw the mysterious woman taking away the treasure box, he immediately brought his subordinates and rushed into the dense forest. They rushed towards the valley where the loud explosion was coming from. In the valley a few miles away, the battle between Beitang Yi and Ji Yufei had already reached the climax. Beitang Yi still held the absolute upper hand and firmly suppressed Ji Yufei. But as the battle continued, Beitang Yi was secretly startled because Ji Yufei was terrifyingly tenacious. Even after suffering continuous attacks, he still stood up from the ground and wiped the bloodstain from the corner of his mouth. Then, he continued to fight with him like a madman. Chapter 125. This was a small valley, a messy little valley. The ground was cracked, the trees were toppled, and the huge rocks were shattered into pieces. Shocking pits of all sizes were scattered all over the valley. In the entire valley, there was no piece of land that was intact. It was all destroyed by the aftershocks from the battle between Ji Yufei and Beitang Yi. At this moment, Ji Yufei climbed out from a pit and shook off the dust on his body. He wiped away the blood on the corner of his mouth and looked indifferently at the figure that was standing on a broken tree stump like a huge mountain. A divine arts practitioner of transcending mortality realm is indeed powerful. However, this person has probably just broken through to transcending mortality realm not long ago. If it's a strong practitioner like Zhao Xuanji, I can only flee at the sight of the wind. Ji Yufei thought to himself. He wasn't discouraged and was instead a little excited. This kind of opponent was exactly what he needed at the moment. I don't believe I can't kill you. Beitang Yi had already discovered that Ji Yufei was much stronger than he had imagined. This was simply the strength of a practitioner that was close to transcending mortality realm. It was very terrifying. A youth, a martial arts practitioner, a young martial arts practitioner that only had the cultivation of awakened mortality realm could actually display strength that was infinitely close to transcending mortality realm. This truly shocked him. Legend had it that martial arts practitioners that were successful in cultivation were very terrifying. Among the same level practitioners, it was hard to find a worthy opponent. This doesn't seem to be a baseless rumor. Beitang Yi's heart trembled. Beitang Yi had long since wanted to kill Ji Yufei, but at this moment, his killing intent had already risen to the limit. Ji Yufei had to die. Otherwise, if he was allowed to grow, he would become a great enemy of Beitang family. What other ultimate moves do you have? Show them to me. Ji Yufei's battle intent was like a rainbow. His eyes flickered with anticipation. He really wanted to know how strong a practitioner that had just entered transcending mortality realm was. Beitang Yi snorted coldly and took a step forward. In an instant, he had traversed dozens of yards and arrived above Ji Yufei. Rotation of 5 elements, obliterate heaven and earth. Along with Beitang Yi's loud shout, a mountain-like energy fluctuation immediately erupted from his body. At the same time, his body surged with colorful rays of light. The rainbow-like multicolored divine radiance seemed to have spirituality. It spread out. Beitang Yi's figure disappeared within the resplendent multicolored divine radiance. A huge whirlpool was formed. Boundless power of the 5 elements gathered together, shaking heaven and earth. Everything in the area shook violently, and the broken trees and boulders on the ground all flew into the air. Roar! Ji Yufei let out an angry roar and immediately lowered his waist into a horse stance. His feet seemed to have grown roots on the ground, and no matter how the world shook, he still stood firmly on the ground. The vortex formed by the power of the 5 elements finally condensed into a huge 5-colored millstone. This gigantic millstone emitted terrifying fluctuations that caused one's heart to palpitate. As it spun, it obliterated everything. At the same time, a great suction force began to appear, sucking in everything that was enveloped by the millstone before completely obliterating it. Ji Yufei's expression was incomparably dignified. He tried his best to resist this suction force. His entire body emitted a blazing aura, and the thick earth energy surged out from his feet, tightly binding him to the ground. Ji Yufei seemed to have merged with the earth under his feet. The great suction force of the five elements reincarnation cycle could not pull him into the five elements millstone that was grinding down below for a moment. This guy is starting to go all out. Ji Fei felt a great danger descending upon him. Beitang Yi didn't hold back at all. He actually fused the five elements into a five elements great millstone that could destroy everything. He wanted to obliterate Ji Fei. It was easy to imagine how strong Beitang Yi's killing intent was. If I still can't kill him like this, then I would be a transcending mortality cultivator in vain. At this moment, the clothes on Beitang Yi's body, which had transformed into the great millstone of five elements of extinction, had already been torn to shreds. Blue veins were popping up on his body. He had exerted all his strength, but because he had overloaded his 7 apertures by activating the 5 elements as one divine ability, traces of blood were seeping out. Even if he could successfully kill Ji Fei, his vitality would be greatly damaged. All the experts who were secretly watching this battle were shocked by the profundity of the Beitang clan's 5 elements. The power of the 5 elements rotated and obliterated the heaven and earth. If this divine ability was cultivated to the extreme, what kind of scene would it be? The Beitang clan was indeed a cultivation clan with an incomparably rich heritage. Some people couldn't help but be vigilant towards the Beitang clan of Yang country. The 5 elements formed into the Samsara millstone emitted a terrifying aura that could destroy the heaven and earth. This made Ji Fei feel the aura of death. Transcending mortality cultivators were indeed outstanding. Even if he had just entered the transcending mortality realm, this Beitang Yi was already very scary. If an ordinary 8th celestial layer cultivator met him, they would only be able to wait for death. However, Ji Fei was not an ordinary 8th celestial layer cultivator. He was a heaven-defying body cultivator. It was his nature to constantly challenge his limits. The stronger he met, the stronger he would become. Only then would he be able to break the shackles of his own cultivation. Divine weapons essence for me to use. Without thinking, Ji Fei guided the divine weapons essence into his hands. Buzz! A sword cry soared to the sky. It was like a crane's cry to the 9 heavens, a dragon's roar. An unparalleled sword energy soared to the sky, causing the heaven and earth to lose their color. This guy! Roar! Beitang Yi, who was inside the 5 elements samsara millstone, was shocked when he saw this. He desperately drove the 5 colors millstone to grind down. However, it was not easy to use such a great divine ability that could shake the heaven and earth. Blood flowed from Beitang Yi's 7 orifices. His face was as ferocious as an evil spirit. However, it was difficult for him to drive the 5 elements samsara millstone to grind down Ji Fei. However, the speed of the 5 elements samsara millstone's grinding speed had increased by a lot. At this time, the slowly rotating 5 colors millstone was less than 5 zhong away from Ji Fei. The mighty destructive power caused the heaven and earth to shake. Cracks began to appear on the ground. If you can unite the 5 elements, so can I. Ji Fei went all out. He had no choice but to go all out. The 5 elements samsara millstone could only be used with the cultivation of the transcending mortality realm. However, he didn't care so much. The Xian Qi in his body rapidly circulated. Yuan Qi surged in his flesh and bones like a river. The 5 elements Yuan Qi in his body were all stimulated by him and gathered towards the essence of the divine weapon in his hands. He was overdrafting the strength of his body. The consequences of doing so were terrifying. His body would probably suffer irrecoverable injuries. The vast 5 elements Yuan Qi fused with the purple essence of the divine weapon. 100 zhong long sword light sword from Ji Fei's hands. The extremely sharp sword qi seemed to be able to pierce through the void. Within a dozen li, any sword cultivator that had cultivated their sword to become spiritual felt the sword qi in their body tremble at this moment. It resonated with the shocking sword qi that erupted from Ji Fei. Break for me. Ji Fei's long hair fluttered in the wind. His eyes emitted a dazzling divine light. He held the sword with both hands like an invincible god of war. He waved the 100 zhong long 5 colors sword qi and fiercely slashed at the 5 colors millstone in the sky. Kai. A light sound, like a piece of cloth being suddenly torn apart, emitted an ear-piercing sound. Wherever the sword light passed by, space split. The destructive power of the 5 elements that descended from the sky was immediately split in half by the sword qi that was like a waterfall. Chapter 126. Beitang Yi and Jiyu Fei both attacked with all their strength, no longer holding anything back. One was a strong practitioner of the older generation who had just entered transcending mortality realm, while the other was a young martial arts practitioner who was at the peak of awakening mortality realm. No one thought that Jiyu Fei could win. Jumping levels to challenge a cultivator of a higher realm than oneself wasn't something that didn't happen in the cultivation world. However, challenging a strong practitioner that was a realm higher than oneself was something that had never happened before. No one would be so stupid to challenge an opponent that they couldn't defeat. This was no different from a suicidal action. 5 elements divine arts were said to be able to destroy heaven and earth. When executed by a divine arts practitioner of transcending mortality realm like Beitang Yi, it was naturally impossible to destroy heaven and earth. However, with the cultivation of transcending mortality realm, he had the upper hand. Boundless power of the 5 elements gathered together, and the huge millstone of 5 elements gave off a terrifying aura as it crushed down on Jiyu Fei. That imposing manner was also extremely terrifying. In front of Beitang Yi's ultimate move, Jiyu Fei had no choice but to risk it all. The divine weapon's essence that had been refined in his body fused with the 5 elements and 5 qi in his body before transforming into a shocking sword rainbow that was 300 yards long and slashed upwards in defiance of the heavens. Peng! Jiyu Fei's clothes were instantly shattered into thousands of pieces by the sword qi that burst out, revealing his body that seemed to be cast from iron. His dragon-like muscles flowed with a 5-colored luster, giving people a feeling of pressuring strength. The unparalleled sword light was like a beam of divine light that sliced through the void, tearing apart heaven and earth. It directly broke through the destructive storm of the 5 elements' annihilation millstone and collided with it. Everything between heaven and earth seemed to have stopped. In that instant, there was no sound, it was terrifyingly silent. In the next moment, a terrifying light that could tear apart heaven and earth burst forth. Boom! The sky seemed to have collapsed and the earth seemed to have caved in. The power of the 5 elements surged violently and the destructive energy storm swept out in all directions. The entire valley was like a wave as the ground undulated up and down violently. Everything on the ground, the flowers, the trees, the rocks, everything turned into dust, completely turned into dust. Then, this layer of dust was blown into the air by another gust of wind. It covered the sky and covered the sun as it surged outwards, turning the entire place into a grayish haze. It actually created a sandstorm that was absolutely impossible to appear in the southern wasteland in the middle of an endless primitive forest. It was really shocking. The millstone of destruction that could shake an entire region of the world had shattered, and so had the astonishing sword light. At the center of the collision between the millstone of destruction and the sword light condensed from the battle skills of the 5 elements, the violent power of the 5 elements seemed to have turned the region of space into chaos. The pressure that surged out caused the hearts of the people who were secretly watching to palpitate. Beitang Yi was sent flying more than 300 zhong away by the frightening power that burst out. Only after falling down from the sky did he stagger a few steps and spit out a mouthful of blood. After forcefully executing the 5 elements unification great divine ability, Beitang Yi appeared to be very tired, and his expression was weary. It was obvious that his vitality had been injured. A warrior of the self-awakening realm had actually injured his vitality. Beitang Yi was so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. His face was gloomy, and there was not a trace of happiness on his face. Because defeating Jiyu Fei was a matter of course. He knew that there were people spying on him in the vicinity. In this battle, it could be said that he was bullying the weak, and it would damage his reputation. And Jiyu Fei's ending had already been decided. Defeat was a given. The gap of a realm seemed to be an insurmountable chasm. He was defeated miserably. He had already been seriously injured in the battle with Beitang Yi. He was merely relying on his unyielding fighting spirit to contend with Beitang Yi. The violent impact had broken both of his arms. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and was sent flying by the energy storm. Like a withered leaf falling from a tree, He rolled and flew out. Rolling and rolling until he was sent flying out of this small valley. Only then did he fall down from the sky, passing through the dense branches. With a peng sound, the withered leaves rushed up, and Jiyu Fei smashed into the jungle below. Not only were his arms broken, but his sternum had also cracked, as if an exquisite porcelain had been struck by an external force and had shattered. His bones, which had been tempered to be as hard as fine iron, were already covered with a layer of multicolored luster. But now, there were actually cracks on them. It could be imagined how fierce the impact just now was. The moment his back hit the ground, Jiyu Fei turned over and stood up. Enduring the pain, he staggered into the depths of the jungle. He knew that this place was very dangerous, and he had to leave. The danger did not only come from the Beitang family, but also from those people spying on him in the dark. No one knew whether or not those people would make a move on him. Leaving was the best option. He could no longer fight. That sword strike just now was already his limit. That sword strike had almost drained all the true qi in his body. He was powerless to fight again. However, just when Jiyu Fei felt that he was about to collapse, a warm current suddenly came from his chest. An extremely powerful force overbearingly rushed into his almost exhausted body, causing his entire body to be shrouded in a hazy black and white light. Just like a dry land welcoming the sweet dew from the heavens, Jiyu Fei's feeling of collapse suddenly disappeared. His body seemed to have been infused with an inexhaustible strength, causing his spirit to rise. The yin-yang jade pendant, at the critical moment of his life and death, once again showed its extraordinariness. The mysterious jade pendant surged with a huge amount of yin and yang power, nourishing Jiyu Fei's injured body and suppressing the surging qi and blood in his chest. Swish, swish, swish. The yin and yang power rapidly circulated inside his body. Although it was an external force, it still temporarily suppressed Jiyu Fei's internal injuries, enabling him to perform 8 desolation steps and leave quickly. Sure enough, when Jiyu Fei rushed into the depth of the primitive forest, over 10 shadows appeared where he had fallen just now. The one in the front was Beitang Ao. Beitang Ao swept his gaze around, and his complexion was so gloomy that it was practically dripping water. Jiyu Fei had escaped right under his nose. How could he still have the ability to escape? Beitang Ao couldn't help but feel his heart palpitate. This Jiyu Fei is simply too powerful. Chase him. Soon, Beitang Ao found the traces of Jiyu Fei's escape. He immediately led his subordinates to chase after him. If Jiyu Fei didn't die, I wouldn't be able to eat or sleep in peace. Among those people who were secretly peeping at Zhong Tai, some people also followed Beitang Ao and his subordinates. The grey dust gradually dissipated. Under the night sky, a figure surrounded by golden light rushed towards the battlefield from the direction of Dragon Emperor City like a meteor chasing after the moon. The terrifying pressure of the 9th heavenly layer of ascending mortality had already spread here from dozens of li away. Those who were secretly peeping at Zhong Tai all changed their expressions and some directly retreated. That person seemed to be flying in the wind and soon came close. "Where's Beitang Yi?" The person's voice seemed to come from the prehistoric times of the universe. It was vast and mighty, and the endless primitive forest seemed to be echoing with his cold voice. The person was a middle-aged daoist with black hair and a long beard. He wore a green robe with fluttering sleeves. This green-robed daoist was Dan Chunzi, who was responsible for leading the top 10 young experts of the Taishen sect to the ruined sky. Chapter 127. With a cultivation base at the 9th heavenly layer of the transcending mortality realm, other than those great cultivators at the royal void stage, no one would dare to underestimate an expert who was only a step away from becoming a great cultivator. Dan Chunzi's words reverberated in the air above the endless ancient forest, but no one responded. Turning into a golden rainbow, Dan Chunzi arrived on the moon. He was extremely powerful, and for a moment, he shocked everyone, whether it was those spying in the dark or those ordinary people on the ancient path. A slender figure surrounded by golden light stood at the top of the tree and looked around. Dan Chunzi's body emitted a majestic aura, and the aura of a powerful cultivator who looked down on the world was fully displayed at this moment. On the ancient path, the people of the Haotian caravan were all indescribably shocked. Ling Luoyang and the others looked at the figure at the top of the tree, shocked. This kind of immortal-like figure was absolutely rare. Dan Chunzi did not pay attention to Ling Luoyang and the others, but instead looked in several directions deep in the forest. He sensed that there were powerful cultivators hiding nearby. However, those people were not Beitang Yi, who he was looking for. He was originally in Dragon Emperor City, but suddenly received the news and immediately rushed over, but he seemed to be a step too late. The battle had already ended. How could Beitang Yi dare to face an expert like Dan Chunzi? The moment he sensed Dan Chunzi's aura, he immediately chose to retreat. Compared to Dan Chunzi, Beitang Yi, a cultivator who had just entered the transcending mortality realm, could not be compared at all. Their cultivation bases were like heaven and earth. For cultivators who had entered the transcending mortality realm, it was very difficult to advance to each realm. Correspondingly, with each realm, their cultivation base would take a big step forward, and their strength would multiply. This was not a breakthrough in a large realm. The transcending mortality realm was divided into 9 heavens. As long as one took these 9 big steps, they would be qualified to challenge the cultivation barrier of a large realm. Dan Chunzi was one of the few cultivators in the Taishen sect who was qualified to challenge the controlling void realm. As long as he could successfully take that step, he, Dan Chunzi, would be a great cultivator of the controlling void realm. Whoosh! Dan Chunzi's figure instantly disappeared from the top of a big tree beside the ancient path, and then directly appeared on a collapsed cliff beside a small valley several miles away. Someone is fighting here. Dan Chunzi carefully sensed the chaotic yuan qi fluctuations in the void, which were still very messy. It really is Ji Yu Fei's aura. Dan Chunzi used his 9th heavenly layer ascended mortality realm spiritual sense to capture the extremely weak aura that Ji Yu Fei left behind in the valley. Dan Chunzi immediately perked up and a smile appeared on his grave face. Very good, he really didn't die to Zhao Xuanji's sword. Dan Chunzi's unruffled state of mind began to ripple. Ji Yu Fei was a disciple of the younger generation in the 9 meridians of Taishen. Dan Chunzi would not have given such a disciple a second glance under normal circumstances. However, Ji Yu Fei was not an ordinary disciple. Of the 9 meridians of Taishen, Ji Yu Fei was the only successor of the Ling Kui Peak. If Ji Yu Fei died, then the orthodoxy of the Ling Kui Peak would cease to exist. The sect leader, Daoist Shentian, would absolutely not allow such a thing to happen. Therefore, Ji Yu Fei had long been in Daoist Xuantian's sights and attention. That was why Dan Chunzi was so happy when he found out that Ji Yu Fei was not dead. After all, if Ji Yu Fei was killed in front of his eyes, he would not be able to bear the responsibility. People of the Beitang clan, listen to me. If anything happens to Ji Yu Fei, I, Dan Chunzi, will definitely kill the Beitang clan, Dan Chunzi said loudly. His voice spread far and wide, echoing in the ancient forest. But other than Dan Chunzi's own voice, there was a terrible silence. No one responded. Dan Chunzi was a cultivator of the Taishen sect. His arrival was already known to the higher-ups of the various forces in the southern wasteland. No one was willing to offend the Taishen sect, one of the 3 great Taoist sects. The 3 great Taoist sects were like birds of a feather. Although in the southern wasteland, there were forces that could rival any of the 3 great Taoist sects, in the whole world, there were not many forces that could compete with the 3 great Taoist sects. Dan Chunzi glanced around, and then with a shua sound, his body directly disappeared from the cliff. He turned into a golden shadow and quickly disappeared under the night sky. Ji Yu Fei quickly moved through the dense forest. He was very careful, trying not to leave any traces in the places he passed. He knew that the people of the Beitang clan would not let him go so easily. But even so, Beitang Ao and his dozen or so men in black still followed the traces and followed him from behind. These people were all dressed in black, and like ghosts, they moved through the dense forest that was so dark that one could not even see their fingers in front of them. These people were obviously very familiar with tracking enemies in the ancient forest. It was very obvious that this group of people had received training in this aspect. In the middle of the night, walking in the ancient forest that was filled with danger, moreover, their movements were nimble and graceful, and they almost didn't make any sound. Including that Beitang Ao, there are a total of 15 people chasing after me. On the crown of a big tree, Ji Yufei temporarily stopped. He carefully identified, and very quickly, he confirmed the number of people chasing after him. His arm was broken, and he couldn't use both of his hands for the time being, which made it somewhat inconvenient for him to move. However, he still had a pair of legs, and with the yin and yang power transmitted by the mysterious jade pendant into his body, for the time being, Ji Yufei still had some strength to protect himself. Ji Yufei was confident that even if he was seriously injured, he would still be able to kill these reckless people who chased after him. Holding his breath and restraining all the aura in his body, Ji Yufei hid in the crown of the tree, motionless, as if he had merged with the surrounding space. Sure enough, very soon, a black shadow appeared near the big tree where Ji Yufei was hiding, and was carefully moving towards the big tree. This was a man with a hideous scar on his face. He was like a cheetah, vigilantly glancing all around. As if he had sensed something, he began to slow down his speed. The forest was covered with a thick layer of withered branches and withered leaves, filling the air with a rotten smell. The quiet mountain forest gave people a kind of invisible oppressive feeling. From other directions came a very light sound, which was practically negligible. This man's companions were very close to him. The nearest 2 people were less than 30 meters away from him. 15 people, including Beitang Ao, were advancing in the forest in a fan shape. Just at the moment when that black-clothed man touched the bottom of the tree, Ji Yufei moved. Like a goshawk hunting its prey, he silently swooped down from the tree. Ji Yufei bent both of his legs and directly knelt down in front of that man with the pressure of Mount Tai. By the time that man realized that something was wrong, both of Ji Yufei's knees were already on the shoulders of that black-clothed man. Suddenly, a burst of crackling sound came from inside that black-clothed man's body. His spine was instantly broken into 17 or 18 pieces by the fierce power. His whole body became shorter out of nowhere, and he didn't even have the time to scream. His throat was blocked by the blood that gushed out. Ji Yufei grew up in the Lingqi peak of Taishan Mountain. Usually, when he had nothing to do, he would go into the depths of the mountain forest to find ferocious beasts to practice martial arts. Calling him the king of the mountain forest was not an exaggeration at all. Everything in the mountain forest was very familiar to him. After kneeling down and neatly killing this black-clothed man, Ji Yufei somersaulted in the air. After landing on the ground, he didn't stop and instantly rushed into the dense forest at the side. Swish, 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 shadows flashed, and Beitang Ao's figure appeared under the big tree. He looked at the corpse on the ground that no longer had a human shape, and his complexion became extremely ugly. Soon after, 13 black shadows also walked out. Seeing this scene, these people's complexion couldn't help but change. Chapter 128. The 2 black-clothed men carefully and cautiously covered each other as they searched in the dense forest. Their foreheads were full of sweat due to nervousness. They couldn't help but be nervous because there was a very dangerous person hiding in this forest. Even if this person was seriously injured, he still had the ability to easily kill them. The scar-faced man who was killed by that person was the best proof. Thinking of the scar-faced man's corpse, no one would not be frightened. Even if these Beitang family's men were used to seeing blood and didn't know how many people died in their hands, it didn't mean that they were willing to see their own blood. It didn't mean that they weren't afraid of death. Carefully searching forward for less than 20 feet, suddenly, one of the black-clothed men felt his feet go soft. The place where he landed did not seem to be covered with dead branches and leaves. Not good. In that instant, the black-clothed man felt goosebumps all over his body, and his hair stood on end. A kite sound came from beside his ears, and a huge black shadow suddenly shot up from the ground under his feet. Like a foot stepping on the body of a giant python, this shadow suddenly wrapped around the black-clothed man's body with lightning speed. Catcher, catcher, catcher. The black-clothed man's body immediately issued a creepy sound of bones breaking. This sound was especially terrifying in the dark forest. In the next moment, the black-clothed man vomited blood. He only felt that all the bones in his body were broken, and then his vision went black. His consciousness fell into the endless darkness, and he didn't know anything. Ji Fei suddenly sprang up from the dead branches and leaves on the ground. With a python coiling around his body, he immediately crushed all the bones in the unlucky black-clothed man's body. This sudden action was simply too fast. After strangling the black-clothed man, he didn't wait for his companions to react. His feet landed on the ground and fiercely pushed against the ground. Peng! The dead branches and leaves under his feet suddenly exploded. At the same time, Ji Fei's body, like lightning, crashed into the arms of another black-clothed man. This move was learned by Ji Fei in the Taishan Mountain when he was fighting with the giant bear of the mountain. This giant bear had 3 killer moves when hunting other beasts. They were hug, hit, and slap. The giant bear was extremely strong. Hugging, ramming, and smacking were the giant bear's trump cards. A single hug from the giant bear could break the bones of a ferocious beast. A single charge from the bear could even shatter a boulder. A single slap from the bear could break a towering tree. If a human was hit by a giant bear like this, even if they didn't die, they would be half dead. The powerful force of Ji Fei's shoulder was even more ferocious and terrifying than the impact of a giant bear. With a single collision, all the bones in the upper body of the black-clothed man were broken inch by inch, and his internal organs were instantly crushed into mud. Catcher, catcher! The man in black who was hit by Ji Fei burst out with the sound of bones shattering. Blood spurted from his mouth, and his whole body burst into a mist of blood. He flew off the ground, and before he hit the ground, he was already dead. At this time, the other people of the Beitang family in the vicinity had already noticed the strangeness here, and they quickly rushed in the direction of Ji Fei from all directions. There were 4 people rushing in from the front, 3 on the left, 3 on the right, and only 2 behind. In just a moment, Ji Fei was able to distinguish the number of people rushing in from 4 directions. Swoosh! He immediately retreated. His body only turned around in the process of retreating. Peng! Broken branches and leaves swirled in the air as Ji Fei's body rushed into the thicket behind him. Ji Fei could clearly see the panic on the faces of the 2 black-clothed men who were rushing in front of him. His body moved like the wind and lightning, and the strong wind rolled up the fallen leaves on the ground, fluttering in the air. 8 desolate steps, 8 steps, 8 kills. With 1 step, Ji Fei crushed the head of a black-clothed man who was rushing in front of him. With the second step, the body of the other black-clothed man was immediately torn into pieces, and a mist of blood burst out in the forest. The experts trained by the Beitang family were simply unable to withstand a single blow from Ji Fei. Under his combat skills, they simply didn't have the strength to fight back. Ji Fei instantly broke out of the encirclement, leaving behind 2 mutilated corpses. The forest was filled with an extremely strong smell of blood. Raw! Ji Fei! Beitang Ao rushed out, and he was extremely furious. 9 figures flashed behind him, but they didn't even see Ji Fei's shadow. Ji Fei had already gone far away. Ji Fei had already killed 5 people, 5 experts that the Beitang family had spent countless efforts to train. These experts were comparable to ordinary cultivators. Even when fighting against hundreds of well-trained Haotian caravans Xingyi guards, they were still able to reap the lives of the Xingyi guards as if they were cutting melons and vegetables. At this time, Beitang Ao was very angry and very depressed. The death of his 5 underlings made him feel endless heartache, and Ji Fei's cunning made him even more furious. Beitang Ao knew that Ji Fei was intentionally avoiding him and making a move on his underlings. In front of the already seriously injured Ji Fei, only Beitang Ao could pose a threat to him. As for the others, Ji Fei simply didn't put them in his eyes. In this primitive ancient forest, Ji Fei was like a fish in the sea, a bird flying in the sky. Wanting to kill him in the forest? This seemed even harder than ascending to the heavens. You 3 form a group and look after each other. This guy was seriously injured in the battle with Uncle, he won't be able to hold on for long. Beitang Ao said to the remaining 9 underlings in a deep voice. Although the 9 black-clothed men were frightened, they didn't dare to disobey Beitang Ao's order. They nodded towards Beitang Ao and walked into the dense forest in front of them in a group of 3. Beitang Ao looked at the headless corpse and the scattered flesh and blood on the ground. His expression was terrifyingly gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "Gu Fei, you better not fall into my hands. If you fall into my hands, I will definitely make you beg for death." Swish. Beitang Ao was extremely hateful and immediately rushed into the dense forest. Just as Beitang Ao was unresigned and continued to command his underlings to chase after Gu Fei in the endless primitive ancient forest, in Dragon Emperor City 200 to 300 li away, in a room of an inn, two people were restless. "Big brother, you really made a move against that person?" In the room, a handsome teenager in white clothes asked a young man in white clothes in front of him with a shocked look. The teenager in white clothes and the young man in white clothes looked similar. The young man in white clothes had a quaint long saber on his waist. The scabbard of the long saber was engraved with mysterious runes. Faintly, an extremely sharp chi seemed to be emitting from the scabbard. This young man in white clothes was the mysterious person who poisoned Gu Fei together with Beitang Ao. This person was the Dongfang Long that Chu Tian had mentioned. Chapter 129. Dongfang Chen had already followed Dan Chunzi to Dragon Emperor City in South Wilderness. When Dan Chunzi left Taixian's sect with Gu Fei and the others, he wanted to go to South Wilderness by air. However, in the sky above Yunmeng Mountain, they were intercepted by Demon Monarch of Six Realms. Fortunately, Daoist Chaoyang, the head of Shaoyang Peak, secretly followed them and stopped Demon Monarch of Six Realms at the critical moment. Therefore, they survived. However, after a fierce battle with the demons led by Li Ruohai and Zhao Xuanji, Gu Fei was struck into the bottomless abyss by Zhao Xuanji and was separated from the others. In the end, Mad Demon Li Ruohai and Fire Sword Demon Zhao Xuanji were driven away by Dan Chunzi, who was at the 9th level of the Transcending Mortality Realm. Li Lingfeng, Ziyu, Dongfang Chen, and the others were only slightly injured. Among the top 10 experts of the younger generation of the Supreme Mystery Sect, apart from Gu Fei whose life and death were unknown, fortunately, no one had died in the confrontation with the demon dweller. When Dan Chunzi returned, he went down that bottomless abyss and discovered that there was a surging underground river that led to an unknown place. Dan Chunzi thought that Gu Fei was most likely dead. After all, Zhao Xuanji was a powerhouse at the Ascending Mortality Realm and cultivated sword immortal skills. Even Dan Chunzi had to avoid his full-strength strike, not to mention Gu Fei who was only at the 8th sky of Awakening Mortality Realm. Additionally, even if Gu Fei didn't die under Zhao Xuanji's sword, he was swept away by the undercurrent. His chance of survival was very slim. Dan Chunzi had no choice but to continue to Dragon Emperor City with the other 9 people. However, tonight, someone sent a message that Gu Fei didn't seem to be dead. Instead, he was being chased by Beitang clan and was in great danger. After receiving the news, how could Dan Chunzi sit still in Dragon Emperor City? No matter whether it was true or not, he left Dragon Emperor City at once and flew towards the direction pointed by that person. Canvassing Moon Pavilion was one of the best inns in Dragon Emperor City. Although it was an inn, it could be compared to the Emperor's mansion. In Dragon Emperor City, the king's mansion was not the most magnificent mansion. This was the southern wilderness, not the central plains. As the saying goes, the mountains are high and the emperor is far away. The forces of the southern wilderness did not really respect the Yang Kingdom's royal family. Indeed, some forces in Dragon Emperor City could despise the imperial households of Yang country. In Dragon Emperor City, there were many mansions which were more magnificent than the king's mansion. This canvas lunar pavilion was not inferior to the regional king's mansion. It was all because behind the canvas lunar house, there was a power that even the southern wasteland duke could not help but look down on. Aside from the main building of the canvas moon pavilion, there was a courtyard behind it that was thousands of feet in circumference. Within the courtyard, there were 2, 9, and 18 courtyards scattered in a picturesque manner. In each courtyard, there were 18 suites. The person who built the canvas moon pavilion actually used the number 9 by 9. This was enough to show that the person didn't care about the human emperor at all. Between the courtyards, there were lakes and mountains. There was a lotus pond so clear that the bottom could be seen. Weeping willows stood by the side of the pond, and the pond water was so clear that the bottom could be seen. Occasionally, birds would fly low over the surface of the pond, startling the koi in the pond and causing some ripples. Half a year ago, someone had booked 3 of the 18 courtyards of the Canvas Moon Pavilion. In the past half a month, people started to move into the 3 courtyards one after another. The people who were able to stay in the Canvas Moon Pavilion all had extraordinary statuses. Moreover, the person who reserved 3 courtyards was even more extraordinary. At this moment, Dongfang Chen and Dongfang Long were in a superior guest room in one of the 18 courtyards of the Canvas Moon Pavilion. Humph. I did attack Ji Yufei, so what? Seeing his younger brother's nervous look, Dongfang Long couldn't help but feel a bit disdainful inside. So what? If I had known it earlier, I would not have told you about Ji Yufei. Dongfang Chen's expression changed. This matter could be big or small. If Ji Yufei didn't die and pursued this matter, then he, Dongfang Chen, wouldn't be able to get away with it. I say, little brother, what are you afraid of? That Ji Yufei is just a 4th-generation disciple of the Supreme Mystery Sect. Moreover, he actually defeated you in the 9 Peaks competition. I am also helping you vent your anger. Dongfang Long said indifferently. Dongfang Chen couldn't help but smile bitterly and said, although Ji Yufei is hateful, I want to defeat him fair and square. I don't want to use such a despicable method to deal with him. Hehe, you are wrong. The idea of poisoning him was not mine, but Beitang Ao's doing. Dongfang Long laughed. Furthermore, haven't I already leaked the news of the Beitang family's pursuit of Ji Yufei to that martial uncle of yours? An imperceptible cold light flashed across Dongfang Long's deep eyes. You. The Beitang family and Ji Yufei have long been enemies. If you do something unnecessary, are you not afraid of causing a dispute between the Beitang family and the Supreme Mystery Sect? When Dongfang Chen heard this, he immediately knew the intentions of his elder brother. He knew his elder brother very well. He was very shrewd, and when he did things, he only pursued the goal and would do anything. Isn't it good to make some enemies for your opponent? Moreover, does the Beitang family have the strength to compete with the Supreme Mystery Sect? Dongfang Long looked at Dongfang Chen meaningfully and said with a faint smile. You. Dongfang Chen couldn't help but be angry. A cultivation family that could be passed down in the cultivation world was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. If the Beitang family suddenly had 1 or 2 great cultivators of the controlling void realm, it would be enough for the Supreme Mystery Sect to suffer. When the Dongfang brothers were talking in the room, in the endless primitive forest hundreds of miles away from Dragon Emperor City, Ji Yufei had already killed the 7th subordinate of Beitang Ao. At this time, the eastern sky began to turn white. It was almost dawn. After a night of continuous fighting, if not the yin and yang power of the Tai Chi diagram on his chest that supported Ji Yufei and prevented him from falling down, Ji Yufei would have long been exhausted and killed by Beitang Ao. This yin-yang fish jade pendant that had integrated into his chest definitely had a big secret. Although the extraordinariness of the jade pendant made Ji Yufei a bit uneasy, he was still glad that this mysterious jade pendant had saved him once again. Beitang Ao was completely driven mad. Seeing his subordinates being killed by Ji Yufei one after another, he couldn't do anything to Ji Yufei, which made him furious. 7 of his 14 subordinates had already died. Additionally, it was almost dawn. In the dark, he couldn't do anything to Ji Yufei. When dawn came, Ji Yufei would have nowhere to hide. You 7, don't scatter. Beitang Ao directly ordered. He wanted to persist until dawn. In the dark environment, Ji Yufei could take advantage of it. In the daytime, he wouldn't be so lucky. However, things often didn't develop according to people's ideas. No one could predict what would happen in the next moment. When Beitang Ao was thinking about how to kill Ji Yufei, an unexpected person suddenly appeared and directly took Beitang Ao away. The 7 men in black were suddenly shocked and at a loss. Because the person who took Beitang Ao away was his uncle, Beitang Yi. Uncle. Beitang Ao said in shock. Be quiet. Beitang Yi said in a low voice. His expression was a bit flustered. He didn't care about the life and death of his 7 subordinates. He took Beitang Ao and like a ghost, they passed through the jungle and quickly went far away. Right when Beitang Yi brought Beitang Ao away and disappeared into the boundless primitive forest, A myriad of thread-like golden lights suddenly descended from the sky. The 7 black-clothed men who were at a loss of what to do in the forest were instantly penetrated by the golden threads, and they didn't even have the time to let out a blood-curdling scream before they instantly died miserably on the spot. After the thousands of golden threads killed the 7 men of Baitang Ao, they didn't dissipate. Instead, they soared into the sky and converged towards an azure-clothed daoist who was slowly descending from the sky. Then, all of the golden threads entered the daoist's fluttering sleeves. Chapter 130. Standing at the top of the tree, Dan Chunzi glanced around and couldn't help but frown as he sensed that there were some extremely obscure auras nearby. Not all of the people who were peeping in the dark left. Some of them followed him. At this moment, a figure silently walked out of the woods. "Greetings, Uncle Master." The man came under the tree and bowed towards Dan Chunzi. Dan Chunzi lowered his head and looked at the man under the tree. He was in rags and had messy hair and a dirty face. It was almost impossible to identify his appearance. How dare they? Dan Chunzi couldn't help being furious at the sight of Ji Yufei's appearance. Beitang clan is too much. How dare they hunt down a disciple of my Taishen sect? After the incident in the ruined Sky Realm, I will definitely demand an explanation from the Beitang clan. Although Ji Yufei was in an extremely sorry state, he was still alive. As long as he was alive, Dan Chunzi could not help but inwardly sigh in relief. "Follow me." Dan Chunzi waved his sleeve as a ball of golden light rushed towards Ji Yufei. It wrapped Ji Yufei and flew to Dan Chunzi's side. Then, a golden light burst out of Dan Chunzi's body and flew towards Dragon Emperor City with Ji Yufei. In one of the 18 courtyards of Canvassing Moonlight Pavilion, Ji Yufei was sitting in a superior independent guest room with legs crossed and regulating his breath. The one who built Canvassing Moonlight Pavilion had really invested a lot in it. There were 18 guest rooms in 18 courtyards. Each guest room was independent and not connected to the others. Ji Yufei found that his internal injuries were more severe than he had imagined. The battle with Beitang Yi had caused him an unimaginable impact. The bones in both arms were broken, the sternum and even the ribs had cracks. If it was a normal Xiozhi that received such heavy injuries, they would have fallen to the ground already. How could they have killed 7 experts trained by the Beitang family? His powerful physical body, which had been tempered day and night, displayed its extraordinary side at this moment. The terrifying regenerative ability caused Ji Yufei's injuries to gradually heal. Of course, this self-healing process was not as terrifying as being able to recover in an instant. On the skin in the middle of his chest, a looming pattern of yin-yang fish was emitting a warm current that nourished Ji Yufei's flesh, tendons, and bones, accelerating his recovery speed. Yin and yang were the 5 elements, and the 5 elements combined to create everything in the world. The yin-yang qi from the yin-yang fish jade pendant was 1 level higher than the 5 elements. Of yin-yang qi, Ji Yufei noticed that the yin and yang qi that flowed through his limbs and bones finally converged at his dantian, where it was converted into wisps of 5 elemental yuan qi by the dim ball of 5 elemental origin light in his dantian. The wisps of 5 elemental yuan qi fused into his flesh and blood, healing his injured body. After the battle of life and death, Ji Yufei's insane method of comprehending the essence of martial arts in the midst of life and death seemed to have some effect. He seemed to have understood something. He no longer deliberately operated the Shen Qi and let the yin-yang and 5 elements in his body interact. In the end, his heart became calmer and calmer. Naturally, he entered the state of forgetting everything. At this moment, Ji Yufei's mind was filled with the diagram of the ancient Shen Qi technique. In the ancient Shen Qi technique, there were many obscure words, but now he gradually understood them. This made Ji Yufei have a feeling of dispelling the clouds and seeing the blue sky. In the ancient Shen Qi technique, there were many obscure words, but now he gradually understood them. This made Ji Yufei have a feeling of dispelling the clouds and seeing the blue sky. A life and death battle had deepened his understanding of the martial Tao. The problems that he had encountered in his cultivation had also gradually become clear. At this moment, Ji Yufei's state of mind had risen to a new level. On this day, Ji Yufei's room was filled with ripples of yuan qi. Vaguely, there was even the sound of wind and thunder. As Ji Fei's cultivation increased by the day, the thunderous sound of the heavenly drum that came from the vibrations of his muscles and bones had started to become louder and louder. The sun rose and set, until night once again enveloped the earth. An indescribable sense of oppression began to gradually emit from Ji Fei's room. In the same courtyard, there lived Li Lingfeng, Ziyu, Dongfang Chen, and the other 9 most outstanding people of the Supreme Profound Sect's younger generation. They had long sensed the strangeness of Ji Fei's room. And the great master Dan Chunzi, who was at the 9th level of the transcending mortality realm, sat directly outside the suite where Ji Fei was. He knew that Ji Fei was in the middle of a breakthrough, and Dan Chunzi did not want anyone to disturb Ji Fei. The 18 independent rooms were actually equivalent to 18 pavilions. In the other pavilions in the courtyard, Li Lingfeng, Ziyu, and the others all came out of their rooms and leaned against the railings to look. There were also people watching from the other courtyards, and in the other 2 courtyards that were adjacent to the disciples of the Supreme Profound Sect, there were people directly walking into the courtyard where the disciples of the Supreme Profound Sect were. These people were all young men and women who were not even 20 years old. They were also dressed in white, but what was different from the disciples of the Supreme Profound Sect was that these people's sleeves were embroidered with imprints. There were 2 kinds of imprints on the sleeves. One was a small sword, a small cyan sword, and the other was a yellow rune. Some people had already noticed the imprints on the sleeves of these young men and women who walked into the courtyard where the disciples of the Supreme Profound Sect were. They suddenly realized that these people were all disciples of the 3 great Daoist sects. The young men and women in white with a small cyan sword embroidered on their sleeves were the disciples of the Guangqing Celestial Sect. The young men and women with a small rune embroidered on their sleeves were the disciples of the Shongqing Sect. These people were all disciples of the 3 great Daoist sects who had come to participate in the training in the ruined sky. They were also the most outstanding disciples of the younger generation of the Guangqing Celestial Sect and the Shongqing Sect. Only people from the 3 great Daoist sects would dare to walk into the courtyard where the disciples of the Supreme Profound Sect were at this time. The others, even though they had sensed the strange fluctuations coming from the courtyard where the disciples of the Supreme Profound Sect were not willing to enter the courtyard to avoid offending the disciples of the Supreme Profound Sect. These outstanding disciples of the Shongqing Sect and the Guangqing Celestial Sect all felt a great pressure when they walked into the courtyard where the disciples of the Supreme Profound Sect were. Everyone looked at the pavilion where Ji Fei was in amazement, especially the figure sitting cross-legged in front of the pavilion, which shocked the disciples of the other 2 great Daoist sects even more. Dan Chunzi was a strong cultivator who was only 1 step away from becoming a great cultivator, but he seemed to be protecting the person in the pavilion. Just who was the person in the pavilion? Why was Dan Chunzi paying so much attention to him? The curious people began to ask the disciples of the Supreme Profound Sect they knew. There were no lights in the pavilion. It was pitch black inside. Under the night sky, the terrifying ripples and the muffled sounds of thunder came from there. For some reason, everyone felt their hearts palpitate. The dark window seemed to be connected to the abyss of hell, and there seemed to be a terrifying demon hiding in the pavilion. Everyone could not help but feel a chill in their hearts. When the moon was in the middle of the sky, the terrifying fluctuations coming from the pavilion where Ji Fei was in became more and more intense, and the pressure on everyone became more and more intense. Finally, the pavilion could no longer withstand the increasingly strong impact of the Yuan Qi, and with a loud roar, it exploded. Chapter 131. Vast Yuan Qi surged out, and the pavilion exploded into pieces. Broken bricks and tiles scattered in all directions. Inside, a person was sitting cross-legged in the air. Rays of multicolored light surrounded his body, as if there was an invisible hand supporting him in the air, causing him to float above the ground. The multicolored light originated from within Ji Fei's body. It was like a raging multicolored divine flame was burning, refining the true body with the fire of Yuan Qi, reaching the extreme and then sublimating. At some unknown time, the yin-yang fish pattern formed by the yin-yang jade pendant in the middle of Ji Fei's chest had already completely quietened down. There was no longer any fluctuation of yin and yang energy emitted from it. The pavilion exploded into pieces, and the broken tiles and beams that exploded out were all intercepted by Dan Chunzi, who was sitting cross-legged in front of the pavilion. Dan Chunzi only extended his right hand and lightly pressed forward. The scattered tiles and broken bricks that were flying in all directions instantly stopped. They were restrained by him, and then like raindrops, they fell down. The eyes of Jiyu Fei, who was sitting cross-legged in the air, were tightly closed. His body was violently trembling. He felt as if he had broken some kind of shackle in his body, and opened a treasure in his body. A surge of power, a surge of Yuan Qi that was much stronger than the peak of the 8th level of the martial saint realm, surged out from within his body. His flesh and blood were trembling, his bones and joints were making noises, and all the bones in his body were trembling. Every inch of his body that could be reached by Yuan Qi seemed to be undergoing a subtle change. Like broken porcelain, his sternum and ribs that were full of cracks were repairing at a speed visible to the naked eye, and new bones were growing from the wounds. The broken bones in his arm were also joined together by the surge of Yuan Qi. They grew and repaired in the multicolored light that was like waves of the sea. Jiyu Fei seemed to have been reborn from the ashes. His heavily injured body was rapidly healing. The battle of life and death last night had allowed him to take another step forward on the road of martial arts. He was undergoing a metamorphosis. This transformation could be said to be a transformation that paved the way for the final breakthrough to the transcending mortality stage. Jiyu Fei walked step by step on the road of martial arts and finally reached the end of the realm of self-awakening. He stood in front of the screen wall of another great realm. The thunderous sound of the sky drum had strengthened his bones and muscles. Faint thunderous sounds could still be heard coming from Jiyu Fei's body. Along with the frequency of the thunderous sounds, the natural energy around his body began to vibrate rhythmically. Visible ripples spread out from Jiyu Fei's body. In the nearby pavilions, the outstanding members of the younger generation from the 3 great Daoist sects couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Among them, the eyes of the female cultivators shone brightly. However, not everyone was happy to see Jiyu Fei make a breakthrough in his cultivation. In a nearby pavilion, a white-robed youth and a white-robed youth looked coldly at the 5-colored figure floating in the air. "I really want to unsheath my saber and behead him," the white-robed young man said in a deep voice. His voice was so low that it was almost inaudible. It was obvious that he had some misgivings. "Don't act rashly," the handsome youth standing beside the white-robed youth said in a low voice. He looked at the figure in front of him with an extremely solemn expression. His eyes flickered as if he was thinking about something. "Mph, I'm just saying. With your martial uncle Dan Chunzi protecting him, who in Dragon Emperor City dares to attack him?" The youth looked at the other figure in the cyan robe in front of him. "Big brother, I hope you don't attack him anymore. Jiyu Fei is mine," Dongfang Chen said calmly. Dongfang Chen said calmly. Seeing that Jiyu Fei had made another breakthrough on the path of cultivation, the urge to surpass Jiyu Fei in his heart became even stronger. Dongfang Long glanced at his younger brother with disdain and said, "You're really stubborn. If we let this person grow up, it will be a disaster for us, even for our Dongfang clan. Since we've already offended this person, we should cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. We should nip the disaster in the bud. That's the wise thing to do." Dongfang Chen remained silent. He didn't agree with his elder brother Dongfang Long's words. He didn't agree with his elder brother's words. Perhaps only Dongfang Chen himself knew that Jiyu Fei had already left an indelible shadow in his heart when he defeated him in front of the public in the 9 Peaks competition. If he couldn't surpass Jiyu Fei and defeat Jiyu Fei, he couldn't erase the shadow in his heart. He, Dongfang Chen, would lose the qualification to aspire to be the strongest. It would be very difficult for him to make great achievements in cultivation. At this moment, Jiyu Fei certainly didn't know what the Dongfang brothers were thinking about. His body was surging with incomparably powerful energy. Every inch of his skin contained extremely terrifying energy, flowing with brilliant light. His body was like a fine gold and immortal iron that had been tempered thousands of times. It contained endless essence of heaven and earth as it flickered. Suspending in the air, Zhong Tai sensed the essence of the 5 elements in his body, causing his blood, flesh, tendons, and bones to release powerful life essence one after another. The sound of muscles and bones gradually weakened. However, Ji Yufei's qi field didn't weaken, instead, it became more powerful. As the old saying went, great sounds were silent. In the end, the sound of muscles and bones could barely be heard. The abnormal movement in Canvas Moonlight Pavilion gradually aroused the attention of more and more cultivators. Many cultivators were shocked by the fact that someone could break through the cultivation barrier in Dragon Emperor City. Dragon Emperor City was not a good place. Without a powerful background, nobody would like to carry out deep cultivation here, especially breaking through the cultivation barrier. Because nobody hoped to see a person who was more powerful and uncontrollable than himself. In the cultivation world, Xiuzhe of the younger generation with unlimited potential like Ji Yufei were people that all the major factions wanted to rope in. However, there were also many people who were jealous of talents in the cultivation world. If they couldn't rope him in, they would destroy him, instead of joining other forces. Because of this, Dan Chunzi protected Ji Yufei when he sensed that Ji Yufei was going to break through his original realm. With Dan Chunzi's help, nobody could harm Ji Yufei in front of Dan Chunzi unless those old monsters in void-controlling realm attacked Ji Yufei. Additionally, anyone who harmed Ji Yufei was equal to challenging the entire Taishen sect. Given Dan Chunzi's cultivation base at the 9th heaven of Ascended Mortal Realm, he could frighten some people in Dragon Emperor City. Of course, the real powerhouses disdained to attack Ji Yufei. Ji Yufei is really a monster. In a pavilion about 60 m away from Ji Yufei, Li Lingfeng sighed with emotion as he watched the colorful figure in front of him. Two teenagers were standing on Li Lingfeng's side. One was a handsome teenager who was so beautiful that even women would be jealous of him. Of course, he was Ziyu who looked like a girl. The other teenager was carrying a long sword on his back. His robe fluttered in the wind as he gave off a sharp qi field like the edge of a sword. Chapter 132. At some unknown time, Ji Yufei's hands were able to move. His muscles and bones surged, rapidly healing his injured body. His broken arm had already been completely healed. Miraculously, at this time, the life essence energy within Ji Yufei's body was flourishing to the extreme. Ji Yufei floated in the air around 20 feet above the ground. Endless heaven and earth origin energy constantly gathered around him. Spiritual light flashed and spiritual energy surged in a 100-foot radius. His eyes were closed and his hands were constantly moving. It seemed as if he was making random movements. Everyone was confused, but Dan Chunzi's calm eyes began to shine. As time passed, the canvassing moon pavilion was strangely quiet. It was so quiet that it caused one to feel an indescribable pressure. Who knew how many pairs of eyes were watching the canvassing moon pavilion? In the latter half of the night, the darkest period before dawn, Ji Yufei's hands began to move in a seemingly chaotic manner. These seemingly untraceable movements began to reveal a somewhat mysterious flavor. Turn disorder into order, turn the impossible into the law. The 3,000 great Taos all lead to the same destination. Dan Chunzi looked at Ji Yufei's dancing hands and his eyes shined with a brilliant light. From Ji Yufei's movements, he could feel the aura of the Tao. Although Ji Yufei's movements seemed casual, the truth was that this was a manifestation of the Tao. From the mundane to the simple, Ji Yufei was immersed in a mysterious martial realm. That complex martial intent was slowly peeled away by him, and he began to simplify it. Then, he began to practice it with his hands. It could be said that at this moment, Ji Yufei had touched upon the edge of the Tao. Martial skills were also part of the Tao. Ji Yufei's comprehension of martial had already touched upon the threshold of skill nearing the Tao. By this point, even the disciples of the younger generation from the three great Daoist societies could tell that Ji Yufei was extraordinary. However, they didn't have a cultivation base like Dan Chunzi's. Ji Yufei gave them a mysterious and unfathomable feeling. Although Li Lingfeng and the others seemed to have noticed something from Ji Yufei's waving hands, they couldn't tell what it was exactly. They couldn't tell what it was, nor could they grasp it. Ji Yufei's hands began to simplify the complicated movements. Then, a series of mysterious hand seals began to appear between his hands. As the hand seals appeared, terrifying waves began to emit from his fingers. It wasn't the wave of magic power, And it wasn't the power of divine arts released by divine arts practitioners. Among the experts of the younger generation, no one knew what kind of power the mudra that Ji Yufei had displayed represented. After all, the true meaning of martial arts had long disappeared. The path of martial arts had long declined in the Tenglong continent. Even though they didn't know what the mudra represented, everyone could sense the terrifying power of the mudra. It wasn't a Daoist method, but it was better than a Daoist method. It wasn't a divine art, but it was better than a divine art. At the sight of this scene, everyone was extremely shocked. Perhaps, in Dragon Emperor City, besides some old monsters, only Ji Yufei knew that this was a manifestation of the martial arts. The mysterious mudra was a battle skill that was one level higher than the Five Elements Fist, the Five Elements Extermination mudra. The true martial arts have reappeared. Such words came out from Dragon Emperor City. Then, several strands of immortal thoughts that made even Dan Chunzi's heart palpitate instantly retreated and became silent. Dragon Emperor City is indeed a land of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Dan Chunzi let out a sigh of relief. The masters of those strands of immortal thoughts were very terrifying. They were definitely old monsters in the void-controlling realm. Of course, even these old monsters didn't want to offend the Taishen sect. After all, the three major sects were closely connected. Offending the Taishen sect was equivalent to offending the three major sects. Not everyone could bear the terrible consequences of offending the three major sects. The Five Elements mudra gradually turned from complicated to simple. Every time Ji Yufei made a mudra, the essence of the world around him would vibrate. The mudra aroused the power of the world, and Ji Yufei's body surged with dazzling qi. The power of the five elements surged out of the mudra. Sometimes, green light shone in the sky, illuminating the world. Sometimes, golden light shone like a scorching sun in the dark night. Sometimes, flames surged and drowned in a sea of fire. Sometimes, the sky turned dark and he was surrounded by dust and sand. Sometimes, water vapor surged and his body seemed to be surrounded by towering waves. With the change of the mudra, the power of the five elements that erupted from Ji Yufei's body also changed. He was in an ethereal state, and his body and cultivation method were completely in harmony. At this moment, the mudra came from his heart, which was a natural reaction of the profound meaning of the martial arts technique. Although the five elemental extermination seal was just a practice, the moment the seal was executed, the power that was emitted had already shaken the heavens and earth. Not only did the faces of the young experts turn pale, even the transcending mortality realm cultivators were shocked when they saw this. It was not difficult to see that although Ji Yufei's cultivation had not reached the transcending mortality realm, his strength was comparable to that of a cultivator who had just entered the transcending mortality realm. This young man was terrifying. He might be able to break the common sense of the cultivation world and challenge cultivators of a higher realm. At this time, there was already a group of heavily armored soldiers gathered outside the Canvas Moon Pavilion. When Ji Yufei was cultivating, the vast yuan qi that surged out had caused the pavilion to collapse, and the sound it made was so loud that it attracted a group of patrolling soldiers from the city guard. However, when these soldiers arrived at the Canvas Moon Pavilion, they did not dare to barge in. Instead, they waited for orders from above. The background of the Canvas Moon Pavilion was not simple. Even the Southern Wasteland Duke did not want to offend the Canvas Moon Pavilion. When the sky was about to brighten, Ji Yufei woke up from the mysterious martial realm. He descended from the sky and landed on the base of the broken pavilion. The pavilion he was in had already disappeared, leaving only the base of the pavilion below. The moment the mudra stopped, Ji Yufei's body exploded with a dazzling five-colored light. A majestic force erupted from his body and swept out in all directions, causing the heavens and earth to tremble. It was as if an extremely strong wind had appeared out of nowhere. The nearby pavilions, under the wind, swayed. Although they did not collapse, cracks appeared on the walls of the pavilions. The young experts on the pavilions all had to use their Shen Qi to resist the terrifying essence that surged out from Ji Yufei's body. At this moment, the qi of the five elements was everywhere in Ji Yufei's body. His entire body, whether it was his bones, flesh, blood, or internal organs, was like a piece of iron. Everywhere was filled with endless power. He was reborn. He was only one step away from being truly reborn. Ji Fei felt that his entire body, from inside to outside, seemed to have been reborn. His cultivation had entered the realm of flesh and blood transformation, which was also the 9th layer of the awakening self-realm. Flesh and blood transformation, that was to refine one's own flesh and blood into new flesh and blood. This was a heaven-defying method of cultivation, to rid the mortal body of its mortal nature. This process was very difficult. For hundreds of years, within the Jade Spirit Peak, no one had succeeded. Ji Fei's master was trapped in the 9th layer of the awakening self-realm. In the end, he couldn't truly change his flesh and blood and rid the mortal body of its mortal nature. In the end, he was buried in the soil. However, Ji Fei had plenty of time. He had already reached the 9th layer of the awakening self-realm at a young age. Additionally, with the help of the extremely mysterious yin-yang fish jade pendant, his cultivation speed had increased by 10 times. Therefore, his chances of breaking through to the shedding mortality realm were much higher than that of his master. Ji Fei opened his eyes. 2 substantial 5-colored immortal lights shot out of his eyes. Sitting on the base of the pavilion with crossed legs, his long hair fluttering in the air, he raised his head and roared, his voice shaking the sky. However, the rolling sound waves couldn't spread out. After all, they were in Dragon Emperor City. Dan Chunzi didn't want to alarm more cultivators. Therefore, he had secretly set up a soundproof realm around the courtyard with his great power. Apart from the explosion of the pavilion, there was no other sound that could be heard from this place. With his jet-black long hair fluttering in the air, Ji Fei's figure was incomparably tall. He formed a seal with his right hand and blasted it towards the sky. Endless golden light rushed into the sky and surged forward like a surging river. The area covered by the seal shook violently. The golden immortal light seemed to have broken the void. The violent power surged, emitting a destructive aura that made people's hearts palpitate. Boom! The base of the pavilion that Ji Fei was sitting on was instantly shattered. Everything within 15 meters around him turned into dust. The courtyard instantly became chaotic, causing sand and pebbles to fly. Shua! With a sound, Dan Chunzi, who was sitting in front of Ji Fei, directly moved back. He didn't make any move to stop Ji Fei. Even if this courtyard of the canvassing lunar pavilion was demolished, it was nothing. At most, he would just have to pay for a new courtyard. Ji Fei stood up and retracted his powerful aura into his body. 9th heavenly layer, I've finally taken this step. A battle of life and death can really stimulate the body's potential. If I fight Beitang Yi now, I'm confident that I can fight him. Feeling the new power, Ji Fei didn't feel happy or sad at this moment. His state of mind was unusually calm. On another pavilion in the courtyard, Dongfang Chen and his elder brother Dongfang Long's expressions were rich and colorful. They changed again and again, but in the end, Dongfang Chen still revealed a brilliant expression. He jumped down from the pavilion and walked towards Ji Fei. Chapter 133. Ji Fei, I didn't expect you to break through at this time. Very good. Dan Chunzi said with a faint smile as he walked over to Ji Fei. Ji Fei's breakthrough was definitely a good thing for the trip to the ruined sky realm. Thank you for protecting me, Uncle Master. Ji Fei bowed to Dan Chunzi. Although his mind had been immersed in the mysterious martial realm, he could still vaguely feel what was happening in the outside world. Ha. Dan Chunzi laughed, which was rare for him. He waved his hand and said, Congratulations, the Green Spirit Peak has finally produced an amazing disciple. I remember that no one in the Green Spirit Peak has been able to cultivate to the 9th layer of awakening heaven before the age of 20. You are the first. Although Dan Chunzi looked middle-aged, he had actually been cultivating on Taishan Mountain for 200 or 300 years. Moreover, he was a disciple of the sect leader, so he definitely knew a lot of secrets. Uncle Master, you flatter me. Ji Fei still looked indifferent, as if he was not very happy because of the improvement in his cultivation. Or perhaps it could be said that in front of Dan Chunzi, he was a little reserved and a little restrained. Swish, swish. At this time, there was a flash of figures, and two people suddenly appeared beside Dan Chunzi. Haha. Brother Dan Chunzi, your Taishen sect is indeed full of talent. Among the two middle-aged Taoists who suddenly appeared, one of them holding a horsetail whisk and looking like an immortal, said with a smile. This Taoist was no stranger to Ji Yufei. It was the senior cultivator of the Shangqing sect, Ding Yangzi, who had once visited the Taishen sect with Lin Shuer. The other Taoist was empty-handed, but Ji Yufei sensed a familiar aura from him. This Taoist's aura was very fierce. He stood there like a divine sword that had been unsheathed, making it difficult for people to look at him directly. A swordsman? Looks like this person must be a senior cultivator of the Guangqing immortal sect, Ji Yufei thought to himself. So it's fellow Daoist Ding Yangzi and Liu Ruhai. Dan Chunzi wasn't unfamiliar with these two because they were the leaders of the Shangqing sect and Guangqing celestial sect's expedition to the ruined sky. This little guy must be practicing orthodox martial arts. I didn't expect your Taishen sect to have this long-lost cultivation method. The middle-aged Daoist, who was like a heavenly sword being unsheathed and had an intimidating aura, looked at Ji Yufei from head to toe. His eyes flickered as if they were about to shoot out of his eye sockets. Ji Yufei felt that the gaze of this senior sword immortal of Guangqing immortal sect was as sharp as a sword aura. It seemed to be able to pierce through the void and see through his entire body. This feeling of being seen through made Ji Yufei feel a little uncomfortable. Ji Yufei, greet Uncle Master Ding Yangzi of the Shangqing sect and Uncle Master Liu Ruhai of the Guangqing immortal sect, Dan Chunzi said to Ji Yufei with a smile. When Ji Yufei heard this, he stepped forward and bowed to the two middle-aged Taoists, calling them Uncle Masters before retreating to Dan Chunzi's side in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Good, not bad. The senior sword immortal of the Guangqing immortal sect, Liu Ruhai, couldn't help but nod inwardly when he saw Ji Yufei's performance. However, Ding Yangzi, who was standing next to Liu Ruhai, frowned inwardly. Where did this Ji Yufei pop out from? The last time he visited the Taishen sect, he didn't seem to have heard of such a young expert. The last time Ding Yangzi and Lin Shuer had visited the Taishen sect on behalf of the Shangqing sect, Lin Shuer had used her extraordinary Daoist techniques to defeat the outstanding disciples of the Shangqing sect's younger generation. Even Dongfang Chen had been defeated by her Daoist talisman techniques. If the Taishen sect had more powerful young disciples, they would have already jumped out to compete with Lin Shuer. At this time, the disciples of the three great Daoist sects who were watching nearby also walked over. Greetings, Uncle Master and Uncle Masters. An ordinary-looking young man in white bowed to Dan Chunzi, Ding Yangzi, and Liu Ruhai, then said to Ji Yufei, Congratulations, junior brother Ji Yufei. This ordinary-looking young man in white was the eldest senior brother of the Taishen sect's younger generation, Li Lingfeng. Behind Li Lingfeng were 8 young men, including Ziyu and Dongfang Chen. Dan Chunzi and the other two just nodded. At this time, the disciples of the Shangqing sect and the Guangqing immortal sect also walked over. Let's let these young disciples interact with each other and improve their relationship. The three of us should find another place to discuss the details of entering the 100,000 mountains, Liu Ruhai said to Dan Chunzi and Ding Yangzi. That's great. Dan Chunzi and Ding Yangzi nodded. Since Ji Yufei had returned, they would not waste any more time and should start preparing to enter the 100,000 mountains. The abnormal phenomenon that occurred once every 260 years was not far away. Every time night fell, the blood-red star in the sky that represented slaughter and death would shine brighter and brighter. The blood-red star was full of demonic nature. Every 260 years, it would appear in the sky and emit endless demonic power that would disturb the world. Every time this happened, the cultivation of the demonic people who had fallen into the demonic path would also greatly increase. For those who had fallen into the demonic path, the appearance of the demonic star that occurred once every 260 years was their sacred day. Legend had it that the day the demonic star shone in the sky was the day when the demonic ancestor returned. At this time, the demonic cultivators would be affected by the demonic star, and the demonic chi in their bodies would surge, becoming much stronger than usual. Every time this happened, the world would be full of demons, causing quite a bit of chaos in the world. The three great Daoist sects would also take advantage of the time when the power of the demonic star caused the power of heaven and earth to become chaotic, and the power of the seal would weaken, thus opening the space barrier of the ruined sky realm and allowing them to enter the ruined sky realm. After Dan Chunzi and the other two turned into beams of light and left, a tall young man with eyes like cold stars, who was the leader of the Shangqing sect, walked up and looked at Ji Yufei. "You are Ji Yufei? I am Lin Xian of the Shangqing sect. I heard that you are the #1 expert of the younger generation in the Taishen sect. Now that I have seen you today, you are indeed extraordinary. I hope to have a chance to spar with you." Lin Xian's words were full of power. "When the time comes, I will not disappoint you." Ji Yufei looked at Lin Xian. He felt some pressure from Lin Xian. This person was an expert. Both of them were extremely powerful figures, and their words were full of the smell of gunpowder. When their eyes met, sparks seemed to fly in the air. The bystanders couldn't help but change their expressions when they saw the two of them fighting. "Brother Ji Yu, we meet again." At this time, a young man with a long sword on his back walked out from the crowd of the Guangqing immortal sect. "So it is Brother Liu." When Ji Yufei heard this, his attention immediately moved away from Lin Xian. He recognized the young man with a sword on his back at a glance. This young man was Liu Yunhe, who had once fought with Ji Yufei in the Yunmeng mountain against the ghost cultivators of Fengju. At this time, a thought flashed in Ji Yufei's mind. No wonder he felt a familiar aura on Liu Ruhai. It turned out that the person who had been chased by Zhao Xuanji that night and hurriedly rescued Liu Yunhe was Liu Ruhai, Uncle Liu. "Brother Ji Yu, come, let me introduce you. This is our eldest senior brother, Ren Wuming. This is our little junior sister, Li Mengyao. This is..." Liu Yunhe introduced the disciples of the Guangqing immortal sect, who had come to participate in the trial in the ruined sky to Ji Yufei. Chapter 134. A group of promising young cultivators gathered together. The atmosphere was not that harmonious. No one was willing to admit that they were not as good as others. They were all young shoujo who stood out among their peers. Youthful vigor, youthful frivolity, these were the strong points of youths, but also the weak points of youths. Young people had a drive and were not afraid of anything. It was a good thing to be courageous in cultivation. However, if this drive was used elsewhere, it would become arrogance. In the eyes of some people, Ji Yufei's behavior was a bit arrogant. Although they witnessed the process of Ji Yufei breaking through the cultivation barrier, it did not mean that the Shangqing sect and Guangqing immortal sect would be afraid of him. After chatting for a while, Lin Xian left with the Shangqing sect. Then, Ren Wuming also left with the Guangqing immortal sect. Among the disciples of the Guangqing immortal sect, only Liu Yunhe seemed to get along well with Ji Yufei. After a short meeting, Ji Yufei remembered a few outstanding figures from the Shangqing sect and the Guangqing immortal sect. Lin Xian from the Shangqing sect, Ren Wuming from the Guangqing immortal sect, and Li Mengyao. These people were all geniuses. Among the younger generation of their respective sects, it was hard to find a worthy opponent. It was not hard to imagine that in 20 or 30 years, they would become powerful figures in the cultivation world. After the people from the Shangqing sect and the Guangqing immortal sect left, only Ji Yufei and the other 9 people from the same sect were left. Dongfang Chen, do you know someone called Dongfang Long? After the people from the Shangqing sect and the Guangqing immortal sect left, Ji Yufei directly questioned Dongfang Chen. Ji Yufei stared at Dongfang Chen. His gaze was as sharp as a knife. It made Dongfang Chen feel a strong sense of oppression, as if there was a knife on his back. He did not deliberately reveal a powerful force. It was a natural aura. Junior martial brother Ji Yu, Li Lingfeng and the others could feel the tense atmosphere between Ji Yufei and Dongfang Chen and couldn't help but change their expressions. They knew that the Dongfang Long that Ji Yufei mentioned had a great relationship with Dongfang Chen. He was Dongfang Chen's elder brother. Moreover, Dongfang Long was probably in Dongfang Chen's room. It had been 7 or 8 days since Dan Chunzi took Li Lingfeng and the others to Dragon Emperor City. Dongfang Long, Dongfang Chen's elder brother, didn't appear in Dragon Emperor City until 2 days ago. Dongfang Chen's face changed, and then he met Ji Yufei's gaze, looked directly at Ji Yufei, and said in a deep voice, "Dongfang Long is my big brother." "What, Ji Yufei, do you know my big brother?" Bang! Ji Yufei took a step forward, and the entire ground suddenly trembled. Without any warning, an incomparably powerful aura swept out from Ji Yufei's body. The oppressive aura was as heavy as a mountain, surging like a surging river, and surging like the sea. Everyone was shocked. They didn't expect that Ji Yufei would be so hostile to Dongfang Chen. The surging aura made everyone feel like they were in a storm. They couldn't help but step back. Is this the power of the 9th heavenly layer? Except for Li Lingfeng, who was also in the 9th heavenly layer, everyone else was frightened by Ji Yufei's aura. Dongfang Chen, who bore the brunt of it, felt like he was struck by lightning. His body shook violently, and he retreated 7 or 8 steps in a row. Each step left a deep footprint on the ground. This was not a physical attack, but it was equivalent to Ji Yufei's attack. A great pressure directly acted on Dongfang Chen's heart, destroying his will. It was as if a 1,000-pound boulder was pressing on his chest, making him almost unable to breathe. Humph! Ji Yufei sneered. He looked at Dongfang Chen with undisguised anger in his eyes. Anyone could see Ji Yufei's anger towards Dongfang Chen. "How could I not know your good big brother? Not only do I know him, I am also very familiar with him," Ji Yufei said while gritting his teeth. When he thought that he almost died in the hands of Dongfang Long, his anger burned to the 9th heavenly layer. At this time, he already knew the ins and outs of the matter. Sure enough, as Chu Tian said, the people who wanted to borrow Chu Tian's hand to poison him with wine were Beitang Ao and Dongfang Long. They were really despicable and shameless, unforgivable. An incomparably tyrannical pressure enveloped Dongfang Chen, making him like a weak grass in a storm, as if he could be blown away at any time. Just when Dongfang Chen was about to fall back again, a hand was placed on Ji Yufei's shoulder, and an incomparably dignified voice sounded in Ji Yufei's ears, "Junior brother Ji Yu, don't hurt the harmony between fellow disciple." Ji Yufei couldn't help but be startled. The person who spoke was Li Lingfeng. Among the people present, only Li Lingfeng could still stabilize his body and put his hand on his shoulder. Ji Yufei frowned. Then, the terrifying pressure that enveloped everyone immediately retreated like a tide. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. "Tell your big brother, I will find him to reminisce about the past," Ji Yufei said in a deep voice, then turned around and walked straight to another pavilion. Killing fellow disciples was a taboo in the sect, and Ji Yufei had some scruples. In the 18 courtyards of the Canvas Moon Pavilion, each courtyard had 18 independent pavilions, and each pavilion was equivalent to a set of superior rooms. And the people of the Supreme Profound sect, including the leader Dan Chunzi, were only 11 people. In other words, in the courtyard, there were 7 pavilions that no one lived in. Ji Yufei easily found a locked pavilion, then directly cut open the lock and walked in. Dongfang Chen gasped for breath. At this time, he realized that he didn't know when, but his clothes had been drenched in sweat. It was sticky and stuck to his body. It was very uncomfortable. Ji Yufei. Dongfang Chen was furious. His fists were clenched, and the veins on his forehead were throbbing. He wanted to rush forward and fight Ji Yufei to the death, but in the end, he still forcefully suppressed his anger. Ji Yufei, who had already broken through to the 9th level of awakening, was simply undefeatable. Dongfang Chen sadly discovered that he didn't even seem to have the qualifications to fight Ji Yufei to the death. "Junior brother Dongfang, what the hell is going on?" Li Lingfeng said to Dongfang Chen with a gloomy face. Dongfang Chen and Ji Yufei, these two people were very strange. Ziyu, Song Ruochen, and the others also looked at Dongfang Chen in surprise. Just now, if it wasn't for big brother Li Lingfeng's timely words, looking at Ji Yufei's posture, he might have directly attacked Dongfang Chen at any time. Dongfang Chen glanced at Li Lingfeng, then looked at the crowd, then let out a long sigh and helplessly said, "My big brother, maybe there is some misunderstanding with Ji Yufei. I don't know the details." Of course, Dongfang Chen wouldn't say that his big brother conspired with others to poison Ji Yufei with wine. Everyone looked at each other. How could things be so simple? There must be something fishy about this. Otherwise, Ji Yufei wouldn't be so angry. Everyone dispersed, and Dongfang Chen also returned to his room with a bad expression. He closed the door and sat down at the table. Chapter 135. At noon, a figure in white silently rushed out of Dongfang Chen's room. It was a young man with a treasured saber on his waist. He was Dongfang Long. Dongfang Long coldly glanced at the pavilion Ji Yufei was in and revealed an expression that was not a smile. Then, he walked out of the courtyard and directly left the canvas lunar pavilion, drifting away. After a short while, a youth in white clothes arrived in front of a magnificent mansion in the central region of Dragon Emperor City. After looking around for a short while, the youth entered this extremely magnificent mansion. There were 4 soldiers dressed in winter iron armor standing on either side of the main gate of the mansion. However, they seemed to be unable to see the young man in white and allowed him to walk into the mansion. On the banners above the main doors of the mansion, there were 3 large golden words written in flamboyant calligraphy: Regional King's Mansion. No wonder this mansion was so magnificent and even had armored guards. It turned out that this was the Prefecture King's mansion of the Southern Desolate Prefecture King, Yang Yuandao. The young man in white was obviously a frequent visitor of the Prefecture King's mansion. The guards outside the gate recognized him. Therefore, no one stopped him and allowed him to enter the Prefecture King's mansion. In the evening, in the canvassing moon pavilion, 9 young disciples of the 3 great Daoist sects received invitations from the Southern Desolate Prefecture King's mansion at the same time. The Prefecture King's crown prince, Yang Zun, would invite them to a banquet in the Prefecture King's courtyard. Among these 9 people, including Ji Yufei, were the top 3 most outstanding disciples among the young disciples of the 3 major Daoist sects. Inside the pavilion, Ji Yufei looked at the invitation in his hand and couldn't help but frown. He didn't know this Prefecture King's crown prince. Why did he invite him? He threw the invitation in his hand onto the table in front of him, then closed his eyes and sat cross-legged on his bed. Because of his breakthrough, he needed to familiarize himself with his new strength. He didn't care about the Prefecture King's crown prince. Prefecture King? So what if he was the emperor? The monarch of the secular world only had a great deterrent force to the common people. In the eyes of powerful cultivators, there was no difference between the monarch and the common people. Even these large empires with thousands of miles of territory had to pay tribute to some of the large sects within their borders. The state of Qi, where the Supreme Mystery Sect was located, had to pay tribute to the Supreme Mystery Sect every year. In the early evening, tens of thousands of households in Dragon Emperor City had lit up their lights. If someone watched Dragon Emperor City from afar, he would find that Dragon Emperor City was like a bright lamp in the endless Primeval woods in the night. The pitch-dark, high city wall of Dragon Emperor City isolated the 2 different worlds. Outside the city wall, it was an endless wilderness covered with dense primitive woods. Inside the city wall, it was a prosperous human world. Of course, there were also foreign cultivators in Dragon Emperor City. Although humans occupied the majority of the population, it was not the southern wilderness prefecture conferred by the royal households of Yang country, but the hundreds of clans in southern wilderness. Actually, it was more appropriate to call them the Southern Wasteland Barbarians. The Southern Wasteland Prefecture King's Palace was located in a courtyard in the west of the city. It occupied a vast area, and the layout was very particular. There were pavilions, terraces, small bridges, flowing rivers, strange rocks, fake mountains, and verdant trees. It was completely in the style of the Central Plains. After passing through the garden, there was a small lake at the back of the courtyard. Although it was a small lake, it had a circumference of several hundred mu. In the middle of the lake, there was a pavilion and a white jade bridge that spanned across the surface of the lake, connecting both sides. At this moment, melodious music drifted out from the pavilion in the middle of the lake. In the hall on the 2nd floor of the pavilion, the ground was covered with a thick golden silk carpet. There were 9 tables on both sides of the hall. Each distinguished guest had his own table and sat cross-legged. As the host, Yang Zun, the son of the Southern Wasteland Prefecture King, was sitting at the head of the hall. In the middle of the hall, there were glamorous singers singing and dancing. There were only a few people sitting on both sides of the hall. Most of the seats were empty. Those sitting on the seats were all young men with dignified chi and strong vitality. As they looked around, their eyes flickered with shrewd light. These young men were all in their early 20s. Obviously, they were the outstanding figures of the young generation in southern wilderness. Report. Hu Zhon of the White Tiger clan has arrived. At this moment, a vigorous voice drifted from outside the pavilion. Invite him in. Yang Zun stood up. The other young men in the hall also stood up. The White Tiger clan of the southern wilderness was one of the 4 great saint clans. That Hu Zhon could be said to be the most outstanding character in the White Tiger clan. Among those of the same age as him, it was rare for him to meet a worthy opponent. He was an extremely powerful character. Why did Yang Zun invite him as well? The few young men mumbled in low voices. One could tell that they were very wary of this Hu Zhon. Ha. Old brother Yang. A resonant voice rang out from outside the pavilion as a tall and sturdy figure walked in. The entire pavilion, and even the air above the lake, was reverberating with the voice of this person. Those singers who were in the midst of dancing were all frightened by this sudden voice. They subconsciously halted their movements. MHM? What's going on? Where are the people from the 3 great Daoist sects? The person who came was a young man with a stocky build, thick eyebrows, and a pair of tiger eyes. His gaze was like that of a ferocious beast. This young man also appeared to be in his early 20s. However, he had a head of white hair that casually flowed behind his back. His entire body exuded an oppressive aura. The eyes of that young man were as sharp as blades. He swept his gaze around the great hall as his countenance turned somewhat unsightly. Old brother Yang, what do you mean by this? I'm here for the people from the 3 great Daoist sects. Where are they? When the few young men in the great hall saw this young man who resembled a ferocious tiger, their countenances involuntarily changed. As for the son of the Jiangling king, Yang Zun, he hurriedly walked over. He. Brother Hu Zhon, please be seated. Don't be impatient, the people from the 3 great Daoist sects should be arriving soon. Yang Zun smiled. I hope you won't disappoint me. You should know the consequences of making fun of me. This Hu Zhon basically didn't give any face to Yang Zun, the son of the Jiangling king. He directly sat down on the first seat on the left. That fellow Dongfang Long only knows how to come up with rotten ideas. Before the 3 great Daoist sects and the 100 races of the southern desolate regions started fighting, I already have a stomach full of anger. Yang Zun was already cursing Dongfang Long in his heart. However, this idea of Dongfang Long's really moved Yang Zun. With the people from the 3 great Daoist sects, it could be considered a good plan to deal with these arrogant fellows from the southern desolate regions. Yang Jian had an ugly expression on his face as he returned to his seat unhappily. Just when he sat down, that booming voice rang out again. Reporting. Gui Teng of the Black Tortoise race has arrived. MHM? Why is that bastard Gui Teng here as well? When Hu Zhon heard the name Gui Teng, he couldn't help but frown. At this moment, the sound of heavy footsteps rang out from outside. It was as though a gigantic monster was walking in from the outside. The entire pavilion seemed to be trembling along with the sound of footsteps. However, when the person outside entered the great hall, everyone discovered that the person who made such heavy footsteps was actually a yellow-skinned young man who was less than 5 kai tall. His hands hung down to his knees, and he had a pointy head and a narrow forehead. Smelly tiger, I didn't expect you to be here as well. The strange-looking young man treated Yang Zun, his master, as though he was transparent. After sweeping his gaze across the great hall, his gaze landed on Hu Zhon. What's wrong? Is your turtle shell itching again? Do you want to get beaten up? Hu Zhon glared at Gui Ting with his tiger-like eyes. A fierce killing intent immediately spread out from his body. Smelly tiger, what's the use of being fierce to me? If you have the guts, go and beat up the people from the 3 great Daoist sect. Gui Ting took heavy steps towards Hu Zhon and directly sat down on the seat beside Hu Zhon. At this moment, everyone could clearly see that there was a bulge on Gui Ting's back. It seemed as though there was something like a pot hidden under his clothes. Could it be that he was still carrying his turtle shell? Everyone present was an outstanding figure among the younger generation of the southern desolate regions. Naturally, they knew the cultivation method of the Black Tortoise clan. Seeing how heavy Gui Teng's steps were, he should still be carrying his turtle shell. Reporting. The Guangqing celestial sects Ren Wuming, Liu Yunhe, and Li Mengyaro have arrived. When the elites of the southern desolate regions in the pavilion heard this, their expressions immediately turned solemn. They all looked towards the entrance of the pavilion. The people from the three great Dao sects had finally arrived. Chapter 136. Haha. The friends from the Guangqing Immortal sect have arrived. Quickly invite them in, quickly invite them in. That Yang Zun smiled. His smile was incomparably radiant. He passionately stood up from his seat and walked towards the three white-robed young men and women with treasured swords on their backs. The three young men and women who walked into the hall were none other than Ren Wuming, Liu Yunhe, and Li Mengyaro of the Guangqing Immortal sect. The prince of the Jiangling king, Yang Zun, was clearly much more enthusiastic towards Ren Wuming and the other two compared to Hu Zhon of the White Tiger clan and Gui Teng of the Black Tortoise clan. Yang Zun personally led Ren Wuming and the other two to the row of empty seats on the right. Ren Wuming was the eldest apprentice brother of the Guangqing Immortal sect. Hence, he sat on the first seat on the right. Liu Yunhe sat below Ren Wuming, followed by Li Mengyao. The junior apprentice sister of Guangqing, Li Mengyao, wore white clothes that fluttered in the wind. Her skin was whiter than snow. At the instant she walked in, the eyes of the disciples from the major powers of the southern desolate region all lit up. She had a pair of clear and spirited eyes, long eyelashes, rosy and sexy lips, and a head full of jet-black long hair that was like a black waterfall cascading down her back. In addition, she had been cultivating the sword Dao for many years and had a treasured sword on her back. This caused this junior apprentice sister of Guangqing to have a heroic spirit amidst her gentleness, making her disposition even more attractive. Facing the scorching gazes of those people, Li Mengyao's expression was indifferent. There wasn't the slightest bit of fluctuation on her beautiful face. She was like a fairy from the Moon Palace who didn't eat the food of the mortal world. At this moment, the female singers who were performing in the hall had already been ordered to retreat by Yang Zun. Reporting. Lin Xian, Zhu Yiqi, and Yi Chen from the Shangqing sect have arrived. Just as Ren Wuming and the others sat down, the welcoming voice rang out once again. At the entrance of the hall, three young men in their early 20s walked in. Next, the people invited by Yang Zun also arrived one after another. As the owner of this place, Yang Zun entered and exited the hall, standing up to welcome the distinguished guests. At this moment, everyone could see that Yang Zun, the Royal Highness of Dukeqing, wasn't that enthusiastic towards the young talents of the major local forces in South Wilderness. Instead, he treated the young disciples of the three major Daoist sects who had temporarily settled in Dragon Emperor City warmly and considerately. When Hu Zhon saw Yang Zun treating him so lightly, he couldn't help but feel angered. As for Gui Teng of the Black Tortoise clan, he didn't treat it as a big deal. His beady eyes would occasionally roam about the Dao sect's disciple. In the end, out of the 9 elites of the southern desolate regions, only 7 people came. There were 2 empty seats. Evidently, the 2 people Yang Zun invited didn't come. Perhaps, those 2 did not even deign to come. After all, the one who ruled the southern wasteland was not the southern wasteland duke, Yang Yuandao, who was conferred the title of the southern wasteland duke by the Yang kingdom. Instead, it was the various great powers behind the southern wasteland elites. Additionally, these forces were not limited to Dragon Emperor City, even the entire South Wilderness was their world. The southern wasteland was an ancient hell filled with legends. According to legends, the southern wasteland had already existed since the ancient times. In the depths of the southern wasteland was the 100,000 mountain range. The 100,000 mountain range was even more mysterious. Even the barbarians of the southern wasteland weren't willing to step into it easily. The barbarians of the southern wasteland didn't obey the Yang Empire at all. Although the great Yang Empire was powerful, its power lay in the territory of the Central Plains. In this boundless wilderness, even the whip of the empire couldn't touch it. The real rulers of the southern wasteland were the clans of those people on the left in the hall of the pavilion. From a certain perspective, these people were on the same level as Duke Yang Yuandao of the Southern Wasteland. In the eyes of these people, Yang Zun, the Royal Highness of Dukeqing, was nothing. If it was in normal times, these elites of the Southern Wasteland would simply ignore Yang Zun's invitation. The reason why Hu Zhon and the others came was actually because of the people of the three major Daoist sects. Of the 9 seats on the right in the hall, only one was empty. In the end, Li Lingfeng and Zi Yu still came to keep the appointment. After all, nominally, the Southern Wasteland Dukeqing's palace was the administrator of the Southern Wasteland. Therefore, they couldn't refuse the invitation of the Royal Highness of Dukeqing. However, other than cultivating, Ji Yufei didn't care about the affairs of the outside world. He directly ignored the invitation of the Royal Highness of Dukeqing. Hence, it seemed that Dongfang Long's scheme was about to fail. Yang Zun didn't see the arrival of the person Dongfang Long spoke of. A trace of disappointment involuntarily flashed in his eyes. He heard that within the 3 major Daoist sects, only that person might be able to suppress the elites of the Southern Wasteland. After everyone sat down, Yang Zun, the host, didn't even say anything when Hu Zhon already spoke. What a great reputation the 3 major Daoist sects have. I, Hu Zhon, have long wanted to experience the innate techniques of the Daoist sects. As he spoke, Hu Zhon's tiger eyes gleamed with sharpness as they swept past Ren Wuming, Lin Xian, and Li Lingfeng. Hu Zhon had long been itching to fight, wanting nothing more than to have a great battle with the people of the 3 major Daoist sects. From his point of view, among the elites of the 3 major Daoist sects, only these 3 were worthy for him to fight. As for the others, he had no interest at all. When Yang Zun saw that Hu Zhon's words were filled with the smell of gunpowder, he couldn't help but feel joy in his heart. He couldn't be bothered to say anything and was more than happy to watch the show from the side. As expected, the countenances of Li Lingfeng and the others instantly changed when they heard this. Hu Zhon's actions were undoubtedly a naked challenge to them. The Southern Wasteland is filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. We also wish to experience the innate techniques of the experts of the Southern Wasteland. Although Ren Wuming's words were calm, everyone present could feel his battle intent. The Path of the Sword Immortal was a branch of the Daoist sects. They cultivated the Tao of the Sword, and their methods were to slay demons and exterminate devils. It was very different from the Tao techniques of the Supreme Mystery sect and the High Clarity sect. Ren Wuming cultivated the sword day and night. He was like a sword, and the sword was like him. Not only was the aura from his body like an unsheathed divine sword, incomparably sharp, but his temperament was also extremely sharp, unwilling to show weakness. I invited everyone here because I wanted to create an opportunity for the elites of the Southern Wasteland to spar with the outstanding successors of the 3 great Daoist sects. If you all wish to spar here, I have no objections. Yang Zun didn't forget to add fuel to the fire from the side. None of the people present were fools. They naturally knew that Yang Jian's invitation was definitely not that simple. However, regardless of whether it was the elites of the Southern Wasteland or the outstanding successors of the 3 great Daoist sects, although they knew that this might be a trap, they still came. This was because the elites of the Southern Wasteland were very interested in the successors of the 3 great Daoist sects who came from the Central Plains. As for Li Lingfeng, Ren Wuming, and the others, they also wanted to spar with the outstanding characters of the Southern Wasteland. Very well. My name is Hu Zhon. From today onwards, my name will be imprinted in your heart. Even if you want to forget it, you won't be able to. Hu Zhon stood up, and a terrifying force erupted from his majestic body. The table in front of him instantly shattered, turning into sawdust. Gui Teng, who was next to Hu Zhon, dodged to the side like a startled rabbit the moment Hu Zhon stood up. At this moment, his footsteps were even lighter than a leopard's, landing on the ground without a sound. Compared to the heavy footsteps he had when he came, it was the complete opposite. I am Ren Wuming of the Guangcheng Celestial Sect. If you have any skills, bring it on. Ren Wuming also stood up, and an incomparably sharp sword qi spread out from his body. Whoosh, whoosh. Transparent and invisible sword qi seemed to surround his body, and in the void, there was a slight sound of something breaking through the air. Chapter 137. A dangerous aura instantly enveloped Ren Wuming. In the next instant, Hu Zhan, who was as ferocious as a tiger, directly leaped up. Tiger stripes appeared on his body as his right palm directly slammed towards Ren Wuming. There were no excessive words, no apprehension. Even if the southern desolate prefecture king's crown Prince Yangzan was present, and this was the side courtyard of the prefecture king's manor, Hu Zhan acted when he wanted to, completely treating Yangzan as transparent. His white hair fluttered wildly, ferocious, wild, and full of bestiality. This was the portrayal of this expert from the white tiger race. Hu Zhan, who looked like a ferocious tiger, had a ferocious glint in his eyes. When he struck out with his right hand, tiger stripes instantly appeared on his entire palm. A sharp tiger claw shot out from his hand, and the sound of wind instantly rose within the hall. It wasn't a true white tiger claw, but the ferocious might of the white tiger caused the heavens and earth to tremble. Under the tiger claw, the astral wind was like blades. Before the claw arrived, Ren Wuming already felt as if he was being slashed by thousands of blades. BZZ. The sword energy in Ren Wuming's body circulated. Rays of sword astral formed a dense sword net that coiled around his body, blocking the blade-like astral wind 3 feet away. Everyone's expression changed at this moment. Everyone felt an incomparably powerful pressure from Hu Zhan's body. The tiger claw that rushed out from Hu Zhan's right claw had already become as large as a small mountain, directly slamming down towards Ren Wuming's head. Under the envelopment of the tiger claw, Ren Wuming felt endless pressure, as if a huge mountain was pressing down on him. The huge tiger claw emitted a terrifying fluctuation that caused people's hearts to palpitate, sealing an area and shaking the heavens and earth. Ren Wuming couldn't help but be shocked. This Hu Zhan was even more terrifying than he had imagined. He didn't dare to be negligent. His shoulder moved. Clang! With a loud sound, a bolt of light shot out from his back and turned into a dazzling sword light that slashed forward. The metal wind blew, and the sword chi crisscrossed. Under the impact of the cold sword chi, the temperature in the great hall plummeted. Everyone felt a chill invading their bodies. Boom! The huge beast claw and the devastating sword light collided in an instant. Unparalleled sword chi exploded with a loud rumble, and the power of the claw overflowed in all directions. The ground around Ren Wuming was completely crushed by the energy storm that swept out. The people from the 3 great Daoist sects immediately retreated. Boom! Suddenly, a big hole appeared in the pavilion in the lake. Amidst the billowing dust, the sword light that Ren Wuming had sent out was directly slapped away by the tiger claw. The huge claw shadow also dissipated. Ren Wuming was sent flying out of the pavilion. He stepped on the surface of the lake and stood on the waves. Although he was forced to retreat by the powerful Hu Zhan, he did not panic. Instead, his battle intent surged. The Guangqing Immortal Sect's sword manipulation art is only SOSO. Hu Zhan was extremely arrogant. His loud voice resounded on the lake. He took a step forward and directly rushed out of the huge hole, arriving on the surface of the lake. In the great hall, the countenance of Yangzan, who was seated high up, was extremely unsightly to behold. So what if a pavilion was destroyed? But what he was angry about was Hu Zhan's arrogance. After all, this was his, Yangzan's, place. If only I had overwhelming strength. Yangzan was filled with hatred. The feeling of being disregarded by others was extremely uncomfortable. He felt very sullen. You guys can fight to your heart's content. It's best if there are casualties on one side, forming an irreconcilable grudge. The crown prince of the Jiangling king, Yangzan, had always been angry with the southern desolate barbarian race who looked down on the Jiangling king manor. He wanted nothing more than to make a few powerful enemies for the southern desolate barbarian race. Hence, when Dongfang Long told him about this brilliant plan, he immediately agreed. Dongfang Long wanted to borrow the hands of the southern desolate barbarian race to deal with Jiyu Fei, while Yangzan wanted to borrow the power of the 3 great Daoist sects to suppress the southern desolate barbarian race. The two of them could be considered to have hit it off and worked together to push this matter forward. Swish, swish, swish. Silhouettes flashed on the surface of the lake. The elite disciples of the three great Daoist sects and the elites of the southern desolate barbarian race all appeared on the surface of the lake. Everyone stood on the clear water, staring at Hu Zhon and Ren Wuming from afar. Under the hazy moonlight, the image of a white tiger was faintly discernible on Hu Zhon's body, emitting an unparalleled ferocious might. Beside Ren Wuming, a lightning-like sword light danced around him, emitting an unparalleled sword chi. You dare to look down on my Guangqing immortal sect? I truly want to see what capabilities you have. Ren Wuming's countenance changed. His eyes stared at Hu Zhon's face, the divine light in his eyes as sharp as swords. I want you to lose wholeheartedly. Hu Zhon laughed hideously and directly punched towards Ren Wuming. The lake water in front of him suddenly sank, and then suddenly there was a monstrous wave. A powerful energy fluctuation that could topple the mountains and overturn the seas instantly exploded. A ferocious tiger image appeared in the wave, roaring as it pounced towards Ren Wuming ferociously. Hu Zhon of the white tiger race was like a ferocious tiger. His entire body emitted an unfathomable ferocious power. The image of the ferocious tiger formed by the lake water was comparable to a real ferocious tiger. Under that pounce, the entire lake trembled. It had the terrifying might of the Tiger King coming down from the mountain, frightening all the beasts. It was ferocious, overbearing, and indomitable. Flying Star Sword. Ren Wuming shouted loudly. His hand formed a sword sign and pointed forward. Wang. A crisp sound of the sword, like the cry of a crane from the 9 heavens, soared into the sky. The sword light grew 10 feet, and like a meteor streaking across the sky, it shot towards the ferocious tiger that was pouncing towards him. The lake water silently separated, and the huge waves surged to both sides. The mud at the bottom of the lake could be seen clearly. The sword seemed to tear through the void, and the entire lake surface was split in half. Peng! With a loud sound, the unparalleled meteor swordlight directly split the ferocious tiger that was formed by the waves into 2 halves, bursting into a sky full of splashes. After breaking Hu Zhon's fist energy, Ren Wuming's sword aura did not stop. The sword sign in his hand changed, and a terrifying sword aura surged from his body again. 7 stars sword transformation, 7 stars illuminate the sky. Ren Wuming used his full strength, and the sword sign pointed towards the dazzling sword light. As the sword light trembled, it actually split into 7 shocking sword rainbows that were like meteors, and they flew towards Hu Zhon. The 7 sword rainbows vaguely seemed to form a formation, and they trapped Hu Zhon under the sword light. The power of the sword aura caused everyone present to be shocked. The eldest senior of the Guangqing Celestial sect's younger generation disciples was indeed powerful. Liu Yunhe and Li Mengyaro, who were watching the battle from the side, had a trace of a smile on their faces. Roar! At that moment, a tiger's roar shook the heavens and the earth. Hu Zhon, who was trapped by the swordlight, had his long white hair crazily fluttering. The baleful aura on his body soared into the sky. Tiger stripes appeared on his body, and the bright white light intertwined with each other. After that, a huge image of a white tiger was condensed on the surface of his body. An extremely ferocious aura swept out. At that moment, Hu Zhon's strength reached an extreme. It was as if he had truly transformed into a ferocious tiger. The tiger's claws tore the heavens and the earth apart, and they directly slapped towards the 7 terrifying sword lights. Bing! 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 Bang! 7 consecutive sounds, and the 7 shocking sword rainbows were actually directly slapped away by Hu Zhon. The image of the white tiger on Hu Zhon's body was condensed, and it was wild, ferocious, and its murderous aura was unparalleled. The ferocious might of the white tiger shook the heavens and the earth. Ren Wuming's body violently shook, and he retreated 7 steps on the surface of the lake. With every step he retreated, he spat out a mouthful of blood, as if those 7 heavy blows had directly landed on his body. Li Lingfeng, Lin Xian, and the others only then saw how terrifying the outstanding figures of the southern wasteland barbarian tribe's younger generation were. Chapter 138. Without a doubt, Ren Wuming had suffered a heavy blow. Out of the 7 destructive sword lights that were like shooting stars, 6 of them had been shattered. Only 1 sword light hadn't been shattered. That was because it was a flying sword light that had been transformed from a real sword. That dim sword light was recalled by Ren Wuming. With a clang, it entered the scabbard on his back. At this moment, his face was deathly pale as he looked at the roaring white tiger image in front of him in disbelief. Unfortunately, he was only one step away from the transcending mortality realm and couldn't completely become one with the sword. Otherwise, he would be able to display an unparalleled sword formation. No matter how powerful Hu Zhon was, he would be able to defeat him. Boom! The peerless white tiger soared into the sky. The surface of the lake under its feet instantly exploded. A vast and unparalleled power burst out, causing water to splash all over the sky. The entire lake shook violently. This Hu Zhon definitely had a terrifying strength that surpassed the awakening self-realm. A horrifying aura surged out in all directions in an earth-shattering manner. Everyone's gazes were attracted by the tall figure that had leapt into the sky. Hu Zhon, an outstanding young expert from the southern wasteland barbarian tribe. At this moment, he transformed into a white tiger and pounced towards Ren Wuming from the sky, emitting an unparalleled and overbearing might. Ren Wuming knew that he couldn't resist, so he quickly retreated on the surface of the lake like a phantom, leaving behind a series of after-images that hadn't dissipated in time. Boom! The tall figure swept downwards like a ferocious tiger pouncing on its prey. The place where Ren Wuming originally stood was instantly shattered. A water pillar soared high into the sky, and the entire lake shook a few times. The huge waves slammed onto the pavilion in the lake, directly sweeping the pavilion and the white jade bridge away, shattering it into pieces. The white tiger image on Hu Zhon's body seemed as if it was about to materialize. The tiger stripes emitted a bright light. The unparalleled ferocious tiger swept everything with unstoppable force. This was the sign of the white tiger bloodline awakening in Hu Zhon's body. The southern wasteland white tiger tribe's bloodline was said to be inherited from the ancient almighty, the white tiger Saint King. The people of this tribe regarded themselves as the descendants of the white tiger, and the totem they worshipped was the white tiger. Hu Zhon ferociously turned around, and his thick and long tiger tail fiercely lashed out. The whole tail emitted a bright white light, and swept towards Ren Wuming's waist like a divine whip. The white light that shot out from the tiger's tail was several tens of feet long. It rapidly streaked across the void, emitting a sharp whistling sound that made people's scalps numb. Its imposing manner was overwhelming. Bang! Ren Wuming was directly sent flying by the tiger tail as he coughed out large mouthfuls of blood. The number one expert of the younger generation of the Guangqing immortal sect was defeated. He was defeated by the young expert of the southern desolate white tiger race, Hu Zhon. Eldest senior brother. A few exclamations came from afar. Roar. A tiger's roar shook the sky. After that, an incomparably wild power erupted. The white tiger that had appeared from Hu Zhon's body burst forth with a white light. Its claws grabbed towards Ren Wuming, who was flying backwards. The huge beast claw seemed to break the void and caught up with Ren Wuming in an instant. At the moment when he was about to be caught by the tiger claw that was surrounded by white light, Ren Wuming suddenly felt a strong wave of sword chi coming from behind him. In the blink of an eye, a bright sword light brushed past Ren Wuming's body and shot forward from behind him, meeting the terrifying tiger claw that was chasing after him. Boom! The sword light directly destroyed the tiger claw, but the sword light was also sent flying. Swish! Swish! A silhouette flashed beside Ren Wuming. A white silhouette rushed forward from his side. The sword light that was repelled was recalled by that person with a wave of his hand. One person and one sword rushed towards Hu Zhon. Eldest senior brother. A clear voice resounded beside his ear. Ren Wuming was supported by a person, and they quickly slid across the surface of the lake. In an instant, the two of them stepped onto the land on the shore. Little junior sister, quickly ask junior brother Yun He to back off. He is not Hu Zhon's opponent. Ren Wuming said to Li Mengyaro, who was beside him anxiously. Under the urgent situation, he almost spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face was flushed. The sword immortal Dao of Guangqing celestial sect was to spend his entire life as a sword. He would train his sword energy internally and cultivate his sword externally. He would use the sword energy within his body to temper his sword all day and night, causing the sword to have a spirit and become one with the sword. Ren Wuming's flying sword was closely related to him. Their chi meridians were connected. That Hu Zhon broke Ren Wuming's flying sword technique. The tyrannical power didn't directly hit Ren Wuming's body, but it still made Ren Wuming suffer a great impact. Ren Wuming wanted Li Mengyaro to call Liu Yunhe down, but it was already too late. When Li Mengyaro supported Ren Wuming, who was on the verge of falling back to the shore, the outcome of the battle in the lake had already been decided. The might of the White Tiger wasn't something that Liu Yunhe could withstand. After a few rounds, his flying sword was caught by Hu Zhon, and he was also hit by Hu Zhon until he spat out blood and retreated. Guangcheng Celestial Sect doesn't deserve its reputation. Hu Zhon grabbed Liu Yunhe's flying sword with one hand and stood in the middle of the lake with his head raised. His white hair fluttered in the wind, and the ferocious white tiger that had appeared on his body had already disappeared. However, that extremely fierce might did not disappear. When Ren Wuming heard that, he spat out a mouthful of blood. He was so angry that he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face turned as pale as paper, and his body trembled slightly. Hu Zhon ignored the sharpness of the flying sword and directly grabbed Liu Yunhe's flying sword. With the sharpness of the flying sword that could cut through hair and iron like mud, it actually couldn't cut through his palm. It was really shocking. The flying sword in Hu Zhon's hand was like a spiritual snake, struggling in his hand, wanting to fly into the sky. However, it was firmly held in his hand. When Li Lingfeng, Lin Xian, and the others saw that Ren Wuming was actually defeated, they were all indescribably shocked. One should know that Ren Wuming's cultivation was about the same as theirs. If he was defeated, then, Hu Zhon threw the flying sword in his hand towards Liu Yunhe. The disciples of Guangcheng Celestial Sect always had their swords with them. Although this Hu Zhon was big and rough, he also had a delicate side. If he really snatched Liu Yunhe's flying sword and didn't return it, then the White Tiger race would really become enemies with Guangcheng Celestial Sect. Actually, Hu Zhon still had some scruples in the end. Liu Yunhe hurriedly formed a sword seal and put the flying sword back into the sword sheath. Both of you come at me together. Hu Zhon's tiger eyes flickered with endless ferocity as he glanced at Li Lingfeng and Lin Xian. His face revealed a trace of disdain, and he revealed his arrogance. He actually wants to challenge both of us at the same time? Li Lingfeng and Lin Xian looked at each other, and they were both shocked. The three great Daoist sects were like brothers. Ren Wuming's defeat had already caused them to lose face. If they lost to Hu Zhon as well, then the reputation of the three great Daoist sects would also be damaged. The outstanding descendants of the younger generation of the three great Daoist sects were no match for the young talents of the southern wasteland. This was something that Li Lingfeng and the others absolutely could not accept. Junior Ziyu, quickly go and invite Jiyu Fei, Li Lingfeng said to Ziyu, who was beside him, in a low voice. Then, he stepped forward and walked towards Hu Zhon. Ziyu immediately flew onto the shore and quickly left. The number one expert of the younger generation of the Supreme Mystery Sect was Jiyu Fei. When Lin Xian saw Li Lingfeng coming forward, his body also moved. He was about to go forward and join forces with Li Lingfeng to fight Hu Zhon. After all, they could not afford to lose now. Chapter 139. The Southern Wasteland barbarian tribe had inherited a trace of the bloodline of the ancient holy beast. Therefore, their starting point was naturally higher than ordinary people. This was their innate talent. It was an innate advantage that others couldn't reach. However, not all the Southern Wasteland brute tribe members were able to awaken the sacred beast bloodline within their bodies. After all, since the ancient times, the sacred beast bloodline had already become extremely thin. It was not easy to awaken it. However, it was very obvious that the White Tiger bloodline within Hu Zhon of the White Tiger clan had already awakened. The White Tiger divine mark that had rushed out from his body was the best proof. The awakening of bloodline allowed Hu Zhon to be able to execute the White Tiger clan's unique divine abilities. Even Guangcheng Celestial Sect's eldest senior brother, Ren Wuming, would be defeated by the ferocious power of his White Tiger. Although they were both at the awakening ninth heaven, Hu Zhon's strength had long surpassed the ninth heaven with the terrifying power derived from the White Tiger bloodline in his body. He was infinitely close to the transcending mortality stage and was even comparable to the cultivators who had just entered the transcending mortality stage. This was what Hu Zhan relied on to defeat Ren Wuming. It was also what he relied on to challenge the three great Daoist sects. After defeating Ren Wuming, Zhan, who was as arrogant as a tiger, actually issued a challenge to Li Lingfeng and Lin Xian. On this night, above the lake in the Junwang's courtyard, under the arrangement of someone, a duel between the elites of the southern wasteland and the outstanding disciples of the three main Dao sects was taking place. This matter concerned the reputation of the three great Daoist sects and the face of the southern desolate barbarian race. It was impossible for the young elites of the two factions to cower. Things seemed to be developing in the direction that Yang Zun and Dongfang Long had planned. In the end, would the young elites of the southern wasteland come out on top, or would the descendants of the Taoist gate suppress the barbarians of the southern wasteland? At this moment, no one knew the final result. But no matter what the result was, the prince of the Jiangling king, Yang Zun, and Dongfang Long had achieved their goal. Ren Wuming's defeat could only mean that the three great Taoist sects were temporarily at a disadvantage. The battle was not over yet. Hence, no one could come to a conclusion at this point in time. Supreme Mystery Sect's Li Lingfeng, these past few days, people have often mentioned you in front of me. Hu Zhan stood on the surface of the lake. The surrounding lake water was as calm as a mirror. His powerful aura caused the lake water beneath his feet to not have the slightest ripple. The surrounding air seemed to have frozen. Is that so? But I've never heard of you. Li Lingfeng calmly looked at the tiger-like white-haired youth in front of him and said calmly, "Ph, you will never forget my name." Hu Zhan was very confident, and he wasn't being pretentious. With his battle record of defeating Ren Wuming, no one thought that his words were empty words. Li Lingfeng said no more. He formed a seal with his hand, and a vast amount of magic power rippled out from his body. 8 trigrams appeared around him, and the power of the 8 symbols of heaven and earth immediately gathered towards Li Lingfeng from all directions. Transforming Dao techniques into mystiques, using one's own strength to draw upon the might of heaven and earth. This was Dao. The 8 trigrams circled around Li Lingfeng's body, emitting a dazzling light. It made Li Lingfeng feel as if he was in 8 independent worlds, giving off a strange feeling as if he had escaped from the world and was no longer part of the 5 elements. Hu Zhan directly disappeared from where he was, and in the next moment, he appeared in front of Li Lingfeng in an instant. Then, his right fist punched towards Li Lingfeng's chest. Streaks of resplendent tiger stripes rushed out from Hu Zhan's fist. A tyrannical power suddenly exploded, and the air was instantly torn apart, letting out a dull explosion. "White Tiger Emperor's Fist," Hu Zhan shouted in a low voice. Vaguely, he seemed to hear a heart-palpitating tiger roar coming from the void. This was a deterrence that directly affected the heart. The world in front of the fist trembled. Li Lingfeng's long hair was blown back by the fist wind, and his clothes stuck tightly to his chest. Hu Zhan's fist had yet to truly land on his body, but the trigrams circling around Li Lingfeng's body had already trembled. His chest felt as if there was a 500-kilogram boulder pressing on it, making him feel incomparably oppressed. So powerful. Li Lingfeng was secretly shocked. He seemed to see Ji Yufei's shadow on Hu Zhan. Both of them were incomparably powerful, and both of them were pitilessly overbearing. Li Lingfeng instantly fused with the Zun trigram. The Zun trigram represented wind, and it represented the power of wind. He seemed to have transformed into a whirlwind that soared into the sky. A pillar of water was also sucked into the sky by the whirlwind, forming a waterspout. After Li Lingfeng's body fused with the Zun trigram, the speed of his movement had already reached an unimaginable level. He was definitely like the wind and lightning, and everyone could only catch an extremely faint shadow. Peng! The extremely powerful White Tiger Emperor's fist directly shattered the waterspout. The exploding water that filled the sky was directly evaporated by the terrifying fist force, and completely disappeared in the air. Just as Hu Zhan's fist missed, Li Lingfeng had already swooped down towards him with the momentum of a thunderbolt. His right palm pressed down on Hu Zhan, and the Gen trigram appeared on his palm. The Gen trigram represented the power of mountains and rivers. Li Lingfeng's right palm seemed to have drawn in the endless mountain qi, and it was like a huge mountain was descending from the sky to suppress Hu Zhan. Rumble. Under Li Lingfeng's palm, there was the sound of 10,000 galloping horses. The water on the surface of the lake bounced continuously, and the terrifying power shook the entire space. The Dao technique and mystique that Li Lingfeng had displayed was extremely marvelous. The trigram was like a landslide, and the ground seemed to sink. The terrifying mountain qi sealed the space below, and it completely enveloped Hu Zhan. When the people from the three main Daoist sects saw this scene, they couldn't help but reveal looks of joy on their faces. Even the eyes of Lin Xian from the Shangqing sect and Gui Ting from the Black Tortoise clan, who were in a stalemate, were attracted by the battle in the lake. Lin Xian had originally wanted to fight alongside Li Lingfeng. Hu Zhan, who was incomparably domineering and arrogant, was blocked by Gui Ting from the Black Tortoise clan. Roar. The tiger's roar shook the sky, and the tiger stripes appeared. Hu Zhan felt threatened, and the image of a white tiger surged out from Hu Zhan's body. Then, with a bang, the surface of the lake cracked, and the lake water sank. A white tiger pounced towards the sky, baring its fangs and claws. It was extremely ferocious. The Gen trigram that was descending from the sky had already become as big as a mountain, and it gathered the mountain qi from all directions. The light illuminated half the sky, and within the trigram, there seemed to be an endless amount of mountains appearing. The white tiger and its body became one, as if an ancient sacred white tiger had descended into the world. The tiger's might shocked the heavens and earth. Hu Zhan directly rushed into the sky, pouncing towards the trigram that was suppressing him. Rumble. There was a loud rumble, and Hu Zhan had gone crazy. He actually shattered the trigram and directly rushed into the endless mountain qi. Under everyone's shocked and indescribable gazes, the enormous trigram that seemed like 100,000 mountains pressing down at the same time collapsed, and the mountain qi spread out mightily in all directions. Rumble. Everything in the vicinity seemed to have been crushed by the enormous mountains, and they completely collapsed as if they were dry weeds and rotten wood. The lake water was flipped up high into the sky, revealing the pitch-black silt at the bottom of the lake. Everyone retreated into the distance, and under this terrifying force, more than half of the pavilions in the courtyard collapsed. Chapter 140. Boom. The Gen trigram completely collapsed, and the endless mountain energy that was gathered by the trigram exploded with a loud bang. It was as if a level 10 storm had appeared in the sky out of nowhere, and the vast and mighty energy that was released made it seem like heaven and earth were about to collapse. It was extremely terrifying. Network, in the center of the energy storm, people could faintly see a huge white tiger roaring towards the sky while baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, shocking the entire space. Such a momentum had long aroused the attention of the major forces in Dragon Emperor City. Mysterious figures started to appear around Dragon Emperor Courtyard. Someone was paying attention to everything that happened here. The application of Taoist magic skills could arouse the vitality of the universe. No wonder it could arouse the attention of some people. After all, Dragon Emperor City was the center of all the competitions between major forces in South Wilderness. The spies of all the major forces were all over Dragon Emperor City. After the divinatory diagram of Gen collapsed, the divinatory diagram of Zun appeared in the energy storm. Being surrounded by the divinatory diagram of Gen, Li Lingfeng rushed out of the energy storm with the help of the wind strength induced by the divinatory diagram of Zun. In the instant that Li Lingfeng rushed out, a huge tiger claw with white tiger divine inscriptions that looked almost solid descended from the sky, emitting a terrifying energy fluctuation as it slammed down on Li Lingfeng's head. The situation was reversed in a split second. Li Lingfeng, who had taken the upper hand, was forced to dodge away from the sharp edge of the tiger. All the onlookers were flurried and pretty intense. The magical effect of Khan and Li, water and fire. Li Lingfeng would never sit and wait for death. He clenched his teeth and performed a Daoist incantation gesture with both hands. The two trigrams of Khan and Li rushed out of his body in an instant, transforming into a monstrous flood and raging flame between his hands. Then, they surged toward the gigantic tiger claw that was slapping down from above his head. Khan trigram was water while Li trigram was fire. When the two forces intertwined, The power of water and fire increased at once. The surging water and the overwhelming immortal flames instantly destroyed the tiger claw. Rumble. Amidst the power of water and fire, a thunderous sound rang out. A tiger's claw directly broke through the seal of the 1,000 heavy waves of the Sea of Flames and clawed at Li Lingfeng below. This was a shocking scene. Everyone was shocked by the scene in front of them. The power of the white tiger was extremely terrifying. Dao techniques and supernatural powers seemed to be unable to contend against it. It seemed to have the momentum to break through all supernatural powers. Li Lingfeng was shocked. He wanted to use the power of the Zun trigram to escape the terrifying tiger claws that were descending from the sky, but in the next moment, he was indescribably shocked. He felt that he was actually imprisoned by an unfathomable force. His body seemed to have sunk into a quagmire, and moving was actually extremely strenuous. It was difficult for him to escape from the tiger's claws. Beads of sweat the size of soybeans appeared on his forehead. His clothes were instantly drenched in sweat. Online ETN. Damn it. Li Lingfeng's heart pounded violently. This Hu Zhon was even more terrifying than he had imagined. It was hard for him to contend against him. Time to go all out. Li Lingfeng's thoughts spun rapidly. He knew that he couldn't dodge, so he could only go all out. The outcome of the battle would be decided in this moment. Terrifying waves of magic power surged out from Li Lingfeng's body, causing his figure to look blurry. Li Lingfeng performed a Dao incantation. Rays of magic power converged on his hands. The Zun trigram that lingered around his body shone brightly as he performed the incantation. Li Lingfeng absorbed the Zun trigram into his palms. With the Zun trigram as thunder, Li Lingfeng's hands instantly emitted blinding electric currents. Rumble. Rumble. Rays of blinding lightning descended from the sky, directly breaking through the shackling force on his body and exploding beside Li Lingfeng. He seemed to have communicated with the power of thunder and lightning between heaven and earth. Rays of lightning appeared around him. Thunder was born out of thin air, and its divine might was unfathomable. Li Lingfeng had successfully used the Zun trigram to attract the power of thunder and lightning from the 8 phases of heaven and earth to his body. The next moment, all the power of thunder and lightning gathered towards the trigram on his palms. 2 thunder balls were condensed in his palms, and an extremely explosive and terrifying aura spread out from Li Lingfeng's body. At this moment, Li Lingfeng seemed to have transformed into the god of thunder who was punishing on behalf of the heavens. Thunder and lightning were manipulated between his hands. The balls of lightning expanded, and thousands of lightning bolts coiled around the surface of the balls of lightning like silver snakes. Li Lingfeng had no other choice. The huge balls of lightning rushed out and bombarded the tiger claws that were descending. Suddenly, thousands of silver snakes danced in the air. Thunder and lightning shook the sky, illuminating the whole world. The terrifying power of thunder and lightning surged violently. The destructive power seemed to be able to destroy everything. Bang! The tiger claws that were as huge as hills directly grabbed the 2 balls of lightning and exploded them. 2 strong rays of light suddenly exploded in the sky. The light was so strong that people couldn't open their eyes. As of this moment, the spectators in the distance couldn't see or hear anything. Heaven and earth were silent, and everything was deathly silent. In the next moment, thousands of lightning bolts exploded in an instant. Thousands of dazzling lightning bolts were like sharp blades, tearing the void apart. Of course, they also shook the huge tiger claws that were descending. Hu Zhon furiously roared again and again. On the huge tiger claw, the white tiger divine markings emitted an unprecedentedly bright radiance, emitting an unprecedentedly powerful energy ripple. At this moment, the tiger claw seemed to have solidified, as if it was really a peerless ferocious tiger extending its unstoppable sharp claws towards its prey. On the internet, thousands of lightning bolts were instantly dispersed by the light of the white tiger divine marks that burst out from the tiger claws. They couldn't do anything to stop the tiger claws. All the spectators by the lake, whether they were the outstanding successors of the 3 great Daoist sects or the young talents of the southern wilderness, all gasped. Hu Zhon was really strong, really domineering, really absolute. He was like an invincible god of war. Boom. With a loud sound, the ground undulated like waves. Li Lingfeng was actually slammed into the mud at the bottom of the lake by the huge tiger claws that were like a small mountain. The water in the lake had already been evaporated. When Hu Zhon's claw slammed down, a huge claw print immediately appeared at the bottom of the lake. The mud scattered in all directions. The huge tiger claws gradually faded and finally disappeared. Hu Zhon's tall and wild figure appeared. The small lake in the courtyard had completely collapsed. Cracks spread out from the claw print in the lake. The buildings on the lake had all collapsed into ruins. Pang! The huge claw print in the lake suddenly exploded. A figure rushed out from the mud and arrived in front of Hu Zhon in an instant. You! The eyes of the person who rushed out from the mud were red. He was like an injured beast. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. His chest was heaving up and down violently. He wanted to skin Hu Zhon alive. Li Lingfeng was defeated. Moreover, he was defeated even more miserably than Ren Wuming. His whole body was covered in mud and his body was extremely dirty. This was simply a kind of humiliation to him. It made him mad. Kumpi. You have lost. Do you still want to fight? Hu Zhon glanced at Li Lingfeng disdainfully and said coldly. Hu Zhon had defeated 2 masters of the Taoism faction in a row. His momentum was unparalleled. Li Lingfeng was furious. He wanted to use the 8 symbols and 8 trigrams to fight Hu Zhon. However, he could not make up his mind. He knew that if he fought again, the result would be the same. Although Hu Zhon's level of cultivation was the same as Li Lingfeng's, they were both at the 9th layer of the Awakening Realm.